Are they on? Oh, good evening. Welcome to the Select Board Meeting Room. The time is now 6:53 p.m. on Monday, March 9th, 2020, and I call this meeting of the Lexington Select Board back to order. The board previously met at 6:30 this evening and immediately went into executive session. Joining me on this evening on my right is Select Board Vice Chair Jill Hay, Select Board Member Joe Pato. I'm Doug Lucenti, the chair. To my left is our executive clerk, Kim Katzenbach, who will be taking the minutes this evening. To her left is Select Board Member Susie Barry and Select Board Member Mark Sandine. On my far left, we're joined by our Town Manager, Jim Malloy, and our Deputy Town Manager, Kelly Axtell. This evening's meeting is being broadcast live and also taped by LexMedia for future on-demand viewing. If you're joining us in the audience and you have an electronic device of any type, I ask that you power it to silent, as it will interfere with our microphones. Should you rise to speak this evening, I ask that you give your name, address, and any relevant boards or affiliations, and you will be limited to 3 minutes. Is there anyone here this evening that may be recording? Okay, seeing no one. We're actually going to take the agenda slightly out of order because we are early on our agenda, which will start at 7 p.m. with our regular stuff. So we're actually going to come back to public comment and select board member concerns and liaison reports in the town manager report and start back at the top. But at this point, we are going to move to our our 10th item on the board's agenda, which is for appointments to boards and committees. So the board will take item 10 first. We're going to break this into 2 parts because Ms. Hay will be recusing on the second part, but the first part is the board is being asked to appoint Shalini Kakar as a member of the Lexington Council for the Arts with a term expiration date of September 30, 2022. Questions or comments on that from the board? Ms. Hay? Mr. Pato? I have none. Ms. Barry? Mr. Sandine? Okay, I'll make the questions or comments on that from the audience. Seeing none, I move to appoint Shalini Kakar to the Lexington Council for the Arts with the term expiration date of September 30, 2022. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Hay, do you want to just announce that why you're...
I will be recused from this next item as I have a family member as one of the candidates.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Okay, on the second item, which is Historic District Commission Associate Member, the board is being asked to appoint 1 member to the Historic District Commission Associates to fill the unexpired term of Thomas Fenn with a term expiration date of December 31, 2022. The Lexington Historical Society has recommended Daniel Hissel. The trustees of the Cary Memorial Library have recommended Carol Sue Hay. The Lexington Arts and Crafts Society have confirmed that they do not have a candidate for consideration at this for this. So, questions or comments from the board on this item? Mr. Pato?
I'm just pleased that we had 2 qualified candidates that I was pleased to see and meet and discuss this with, and whichever one this board chooses, I will be happy with.
I think you're on the right track. That is wonderful that we have 2 qualified folks, and it's nice to have choices for these things. Ms. Barry? Mr. Sandine?
I agree with those sentiments.
Okay. So, board, we have a choice to make. We have two options here for consideration. I'm not sure if folks had a chance to either talk to either of the candidates or to, read the application material, which I hope you did. I was wondering if anyone had any or any proposal from the floor that we would like to put forward. Ms. Barry?
I would be voting for Mr. Hissel.
Mr. Hissel? Mr. Pato?
As will I.
Okay, and Mr. Sandine?
That sounds good.
Okay. I think we have a majority looking to appoint Mr. Hissel. So I'm going to make the motion. I move to appoint Daniel Hissel to the Historic District Commission Associate position to fill the unexpired term of Thomas Fenn with a term expiration date of December 31, 2022. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second, and all in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous. Okay, so we will now get Ms. Hay back in. Okay. Our consent agenda this evening has several items on it. The first item on the consent agenda is the request for the use of the battle green by the Lexington Historical Society's Battle of Lexington Reenactment for Children. The Lexington Historical Society has requested permission to use the battle green on Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020, from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. for the purpose of their annual Battle of Lexington Reenactment for Children. Police, fire, and DPW have no objections to this request. Our second item is to approve meeting minutes. The meeting minutes of the following executive sessions are ready for review and approval, which is July 22nd, 2019, and August 5th, 2019. Questions or comments on the consent agenda from the board? Ms. Barry, Ms. Hay, Mr. Patton, no?
Yeah.
No questions on the consent. I move the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, and all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. It is approved. Okay, so now we will resume with our regular scheduled items. And before we get into the items for individual consideration, I'm going to ask if there is anyone that wishes to make a comment about an item that is not covered elsewhere in tonight's agenda. Okay, seeing no one. We will now move on to select board concerns and liaison reports. Ms. Hay.
So I have a couple of things. Last week, we received notice that the MAPC has awarded funding for the Battle Road Scenic Byway Committee to assist with its application for the federal scenic byway status. You may recall we signed on to the application requesting that technical assistance grant, and so that is being spearheaded by the town of Arlington. And the Battle Road Scenic Byway Committee is meeting this week, and we will be figuring out how we're proceeding, so I will report back after that. In addition, MAGIC met last week, and we heard a presentation on multifamily zoning and housing opportunities in Greater Boston, put on by Amy Dane, who's the consultant for MAPC. She talked about the status on multifamily zoning within MAGIC communities, and she had 4 essential takeaway and recommendations from a very comprehensive presentation, the slides for which are available through the MAGIC website. But her recommendations were that we should all be looking to reform the approval process in order to create flexibility and predictability, that we should zone more land to multifamily use, that we should allow multifamily housing next to mixed-use hubs as opposed to isolated, and that we should be creating more housing in the centers of our communities and near transit areas, and planning for connected growth nodes when we do permit things along the edges. So all of this kind of connects into some of the things that we've been talking about in our other projects. As part of her presentation, she did highlight the Lexington Place condominiums project, although she also made the point that it took 2 tries to get it through town meeting, referring back to her commenting about flexibility and predictability. Finally, the Lexington Human Rights Committee met last Friday, and there are just a couple of updates. I want to remind people the screening of I'm Not a Racist, Am I? Film and discussion will be held on March 25th at 6:30 in Lexington High School. I recognize that's a town meeting night, but for non-town meeting members, it looks like a very interesting program. I encourage people to go. The Parent Academy is going to be held on March 14th from 9:30 in the morning till 2:30 in the afternoon, subtitled Managing and Empowering Parents to Manage the Changing Demands of Parenting Today. There are workshops, support groups. It's free, as are each of these, open to the public. Pre-registration is recommended for the Parent Academy, which will be through the Lexington Recreation Department.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato.
So last Thursday, I attended the MMA Transportation and DPW Policy Committee meeting. And most of the time was spent planning for lobbying for the transportation bond bill, which was voted on Thursday in the afternoon, and reviewing the transportation budget bill, which included Chapter 90 funding increases to $300 million a year, which is a welcome increase. That still has to go to the Senate, but the House has approved that.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. I just have a couple of items. This past Saturday, I represented the board at the Moderators Workshop for new town meeting members. We have a lot of new members that are joining town meeting, and it was very exciting to see some new faces, and they're all eager to get started. Had a lot of great questions. On Wednesday, I attended with Ms. Barry as well the LexRec Community Forum, and it was a very interactive forum. They got a lot of data from folks on how they're using our facilities, what types of facilities they folks want to see. It was pretty well attended. I'd say there was about 40 or 50 people in attendance at Estabrook Hall, so it was great. On Friday, I attended the ribbon cutting representing the board for the Enterprise Bank, which just opened this past week. On Friday, they had the ribbon cutting, and I wish them all the best of luck in Lexington. And lastly, thing that I believe is on everybody's mind this week is the coronavirus. The town has been working diligently, and I think Mr. Malloy will also be addressing this, so I won't repeat too much, but we will be holding a community-wide forum on the coronavirus, give folks an opportunity to ask questions. That's going to be this Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. There'll be an opportunity for folks to tweet questions if they're not comfortable coming. It'll also be broadcast live, but we've been putting a lot of work in over the last 48 hours or more to organize this event, and hopefully it gets everybody communicating the same message to all the same people in Lexington. So just please mark that on your calendars, and hopefully some of the members of the board can attend. There will be a panel of different groups from town that will be presenting and answering questions. And that's all I have. Ms. Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Lucente. So as Mr. Lucente mentioned, we were at the LexRec Needs Community Kickoff meeting on Wednesday night. On Thursday morning, I was at the stakeholder meeting for the people involved with the LexRec Needs assessment. The representative from this board, as being the Recreation Committee liaison to the stakeholder meeting, will be meeting every 4 to 6 weeks over the next 4 to 6 months to shepherd this process through. And the last thing I have, because I think we could all use a little bit of levity tonight, because the world is just a little too serious today, is for those of you who have followed me and followed what goes on in Cary Hall and the fact that Spectacle does such an amazing job there with the concerts they bring. And I've been dying for a concert T-shirt that says Lexington, Mass on it. Now, I was not at the concert last night of someone that I'm not even sure who it is, but John Lodge from Moody Blues. Okay, so he was there last night, but I had friends there last night. And so Lexington made it. You got to zoom in here, LexMedia. Way down here at the bottom. See, way down here? For those of you that know concert T-shirts. It says Lexington, Mass on this one, so we should frame this or something. So just a little bit of levity tonight. So thank you to Spectacle. They do have some great things coming up, like Max Weinstein, who was with Bruce Springsteen. I have challenged them to get Elton John, so if that happens, I'll need oxygen that night. That's all I got.
Thank you, Ms. Barry, for lightening things up a little. Mr. Sandine.
So I just wanted to reiterate Mr. Lucente's comments about coronavirus being on everybody's mind, and to say thank you to town staff and Board of Health and the health director and school committee and everybody else who's worked tirelessly on this issue over the last 48 to maybe last 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandine. Mr. Malloy, is there a town manager's report this evening?
Just very, just very briefly on, to expand on the coronavirus discussion a little bit. We have begun stepping up our public information that we're providing on it, and as you said, we'll be having a session on Thursday. In addition, what we've been doing is we've been coordinating, and just starting this morning, we've started coordinating a daily conference call between school officials, town officials, health officials, I guess that's it, town officials, school officials, health officials, just to talk about it, make sure that all of our various departments are able to ask questions and get those answered as to a lot of different facets of our operations, and to make sure that we're all basically on the same page and have the same understanding. So we're, as you said, we're doing a lot of coordinating these days on that particular issue.
And if folks want more information on the town's response to the coronavirus or any other additional information can be found on our website outside of the forum. There'll be continuous updates to the website, and the address is lexingtonma.gov. And there is a page now dedicated to the coronavirus. Okay, so moving on to our first item on the agenda this evening, which is for the board to receive an update on the hazard mitigation plan resolution. Mr. Malloy, before I get into too many details, do you want to update the board on where we stand with this item for tonight?
Yes, this is a item that we started having a discussion at the last meeting about, and we realized that we had the wrong attachment, and we put the right attachment on Monday morning, but it didn't give the board enough time to review it because it's a lengthy document. And so we put it on tonight for discussion, and both our DPW director and our town engineer had personal family-related matters that they had to attend to tonight, and so at the last minute they weren't able to make it. So we will put this on the agenda for the next board meeting. It is something that we do want to try to get approved by the board as soon as we possibly can, because there are grant programs that are available through the Commonwealth that we would like to have access to, and we have to have the hazardous mitigation plan adopted before we're able to, or we're eligible to apply for those grants.
So we anticipate this will come back to the board on
Next meeting.
Monday night. And I will warn the board now, Monday, the next meeting I think is going to be quite lengthy, so we may want to start early, just because we have a lot of items that kept getting pushed back to the 16th. So unfortunately, this is another 20-minute item that we'll have to squeeze in. So thank you, Mr. Malloy. I won't take any further comments or questions unless someone's eager to say something about it. Okay. So there is no motion there, and there's no vote, and we will hopefully have that back on the 16th. Our second item on the agenda is for this evening is for the board to receive an update from the Communications Advisory Committee Chair regarding Public Education and Government PEG access provider procurement. Mr. Ken Pogren is here to make the presentation. Mr. Pogren. Welcome, Mr. Pogren. If you could introduce who's with you and make sure you turn the microphone on. Thank you.
There we are. Okay. So my name is Ken Pogren, and I'm the chair of the Communications Advisory Committee. And with me this evening is Rita Vashani, who's a colleague of mine on the committee. Rita is the individual who's been tracking the numbers in the PEG account over the past few years. And also here in the audience tonight is Smita Desai. Smita is another committee member and also a member of our team that works with oversight of LexMedia. So I'm here this evening to talk about the PEG access provider contract. And I thank you for giving us the opportunity to do so. What I will be talking about this evening is where we are today with the current contract with LexMedia. We'll talk about the new approach that we'd like to take to procuring the next contract for PEG access. We'll go over the available funds for the PEG access contract and the concerns that we have about the funding levels that we expect to see in the future, and some decisions that are eventually going to have to be made about that. We'll talk about how the contract has been funded in the past, what the current funding situation is, and again, the concerns that we have about the future. We'll also go over some of the specific decisions that will be made as we go between now and the end of June, when we expect to have a new PEG access contract in place. And I'll close by outlining the next steps that we'll be taking on the Communications Advisory Committee to move this process along. So where are we today? Currently, LexMedia is our PEG access provider here in Lexington. We are at the very end of a 9.5-year contract with LexMedia. The contract began in January of 2011. It had a 3.5-year initial term followed by two 3-year renewal terms. This is actually the town's second contract with LexMedia. It was procured via the competitive RFP process in the fall of 2010, and as I said, it began in January of 2011. The odd 3.5-year initial term was to align the contract year with the fiscal years that are involved. Now, the contract calls for the CAC, the Communications Advisory Committee, to evaluate LexMedia's performance prior to each renewal term and at the end of the contract. And we're pleased to say that each of the 2 performance evaluations we've done so far have been very favorable, and all of the feedback and public comments that we've gotten have been favorable and uniformly positive to LexMedia. So we're going for a new contract at this time because 10 years is the maximum length of time that the PEG access contract is authorized. And this was authorized by a vote of town meeting back in 2010. The contract so far has been fully funded from the so-called 5% franchise fee that we get on the cable television revenues of the 3 cable TV providers in town, Comcast, RCN, and Verizon. And there have been no separate appropriations of other town funds in order to support the PEG access activity. The contract with LexMedia includes the town providing them with the sublease on the Klein Hall studio facility that they have, as well as the use of all of the equipment and the leasehold improvements that LexMedia has purchased and LexMedia has made using contract funds. And by the terms of the contract, all those purchases and leasehold improvements are actually the property of the town. So that's the current contract. And what I'd like to do is tell you about the new approach that we hope to take with the contract coming up. As I mentioned, both of the existing contracts with LexMedia have been the full formal competitive RFP process. And in fact, in the 2010 procurement, LexMedia was the only bidder. They were the only ones to submit a proposal, any sort of proposal, whether responsive or non-responsive, was the only proposal that the town received. So, as you know, a full competitive RFP process is lengthy and complex and cumbersome. There are a lot of hoops to jump through. So we've been hopeful that it might be possible to find an appropriate way of entering into a new contract with LexMedia that doesn't involve a full competitive RFP process. So this year, our purchasing director, Liz Mancini, suggested using something called a grant agreement instead of a competitive RFP contract. Now, a grant agreement under state law is a form of contract that's not subject to the competitive procurement regulations in certain situations. And those situations are that the grant is for a public purpose, so it's not being used to purchase supplies or services that are consumed by the town government itself. And the entity receiving the grant must be a not-for-profit organization. And the entity receiving the grant must already be in the business of providing that service for which you're giving them the grant. And of course, LexMedia and PEG Access meet all 3 of those criteria. So we feel that it is an appropriate use of the grant agreement process rather than the competitive RFP. So it gives us a much simpler path to getting a new contract in place with LexMedia. Now, another aspect of it is that since it's not a competitive procurement, the town can direct the grant to a qualified provider of its choice. So we can say, okay, we'd like to give this grant for PEG access to LexMedia as a qualified provider. So other than the manner in which it's procured, the grant agreement is a normal contract. We negotiate with the awardee. It can contain all of the requirements and the terms and provisions that we would have in any other contract, in a contract entered into in any other way with LexMedia. And it can also include the sublease and the use of the equipment and so forth, as with the current process. So this approach has been run by town council and run by Mr. Malloy as well. And both have agreed that this is an appropriate use of the grant agreement. And we have, in fact, found examples of other municipalities that have used this approach for their PEG access contracts. So our working group in the Communications Advisory Committee recommends that we go ahead with a grant agreement approach, forego the competitive RFP, and we're seeking the concurrence of the board that this is an appropriate thing that we should do. So let's talk about the funding for the contract and talk about the availability of funds. I mentioned that funds to support the PEG access contract have come from the 5% franchise fee, or tax in effect, that's assessed on cable television revenues from our 3 cable TV providers here in Lexington. We've benefited over the years from the fact that Lexington has had very high take rates of cable TV services, very high penetration rates. A large fraction of our residents have cable television or have had cable television service. And not only that, but subscribers have tended to buy premium packages, not just the lowest level of service that they can get. So this has meant that traditionally we've seen year-over-year growth in the PEG revenues that we've received from the cable providers. And in fact, we've been heretofore in the very fortunate position that PEG revenues have actually been growing faster than our expenses for LexMedia and associated things. And so we've actually accumulated a surplus in the PEG account over the years. So we've, as I mentioned earlier, we've fully funded the PEG access contract with LexMedia from the PEG revenues each year. So just as an example, we started out in FY 2012 with the LexMedia contract at $375K per year. And I picked 2012 because 2011 was a half year for the contract. The first year of the final renewal term was FY 18, and that was $525K. And then finally, the current year is ending up at $559 this year. There's some additional expenses that hit the PEG account in addition to the LexMedia contract, and that's the payment to Avalon for the Klein Hall facility. And also there's part of the wages of a town AV tech that is also charged to the PEG account. That's about $55K for Klein Hall and about $24K for the AV tech. Now, the big story in cable TV in recent years has been cord cutting, the availability of streaming services and alternatives to buying those expensive cable TV packages. And this has been written about in popular media and in the trade press for several years now. And we haven't really seen any cord cutting effects until FY 2019. We've been doing very well, thank you, because even though subscriber counts have been trending downwards, the revenues themselves have been going up, and that sort of canceled out the downward trend. That changed in FY 2019, where we actually saw a 5% decrease in PEG revenues from 627 in FY 18 to 598 in 2019. So if this trend continues, we're going to get to the point where we are at the point where we are now beginning to spend more on the PEG access contract and related expenses than we're taking in revenue. And so we are going to begin spending down that cushion that we built up in the PEG account over the years. So as we think about putting a new PEG access contract in place with LexMedia, we have to very carefully consider the level at which we want to fund that contract. And that's really one of the more important decisions that we'll have to make. But cord cutting isn't the only challenge that we're going to be facing with regard to PEG revenues. There are also regulatory and potentially technology changes coming as well. Now, you may recall that a little over a year ago, I think it was November of 2018, the Federal Communications Commission was contemplating a rule change that would require cable licenses, any in-kind contributions that a cable company makes to a municipality had to be considered to be part of the total of the 5% franchise fee. So here in Lexington, for example, we get the institutional network, the INET from RCN. We get free cable TV service to town buildings and schools and so forth. And the FCC is basically saying that with this rule change, the value of those things would have to be deducted from the 5% franchise fee. So that would change the amount of money that we would be getting. Most cable licenses until then had basically had those in-kind contributions as additions on top of the franchise fee. The town filed comments with the FCC in November of 2018. The FCC went ahead with their rulemaking change anyway. And so basically where things stand is that the cable providers can go to the municipality and ask to renegotiate that aspect of their license and ask for that change in how the franchise fee, the PEG access funds are calculated. The impact of that is difficult to estimate. We don't know how many or whether any of our 3 franchisees will come and ask us for that kind of change to the license. But we think the impact of it could be on the order of 35 to 50K per year here in Lexington. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We don't know. There's also technology change coming along. You've all heard about 5G wireless technology and how 5G technology will replace the 4G wireless technology in your smartphones. In addition to 5G for cell phones, there's also something called 5G fixed wireless, which uses a similar technology such that programming providers could potentially use radio instead of cable to deliver programming to our homes. So if that happens, we might see programming providers abandon cable and go to 5G wireless as their method of program delivery. And so the cable TV franchises would atrophy, and we would no longer be getting any revenue for PEG access because that's associated with cable television as the method of delivery. So that PEG revenue would disappear unless there were significant legislative changes at the federal level to the Communications Act and the Cable Act to modify what actually is subject to the franchise fee and PEG revenues. But right now, the thinking is that if, for example, Verizon went to 5G fixed wireless and dropped Fios cable television service, we'd lose the PEG revenue that we're currently getting from Verizon. So it's difficult to guess whether this will happen. It's difficult to guess when this might happen. We're thinking it's probably on the order of 5 to 10 years. And as there might, perhaps as a canary in the coal mine, we are in the midst of a license renewal cycle with Verizon. Their cable license is up for renewal in October of 2021. And they have asked us to renew their cable license for 5 years rather than 10 years, which has been the customary length of time. So that may be, as I said, a canary in the coal mine there. So that's something that also we're going to have to think about when we look at PEG revenues, levels of funding, and how we want to do all of this. So we're going to need to make some decisions at some point down the road. In order to continue PEG access services at the levels to which we've become accustomed, and we've got decreasing PEG revenues, which is what's funded PEG access until now, the town is going to have to think about appropriating other funds if we want to keep a constant funding level for PEG access and a constant level of service. So we have to consider, we do have the cushion in the PEG access account today. We have to consider how quickly we want to spend down that cushion in order to maintain service levels, or at what level we want to fund PEG access going forward. By how much do we want to reduce the budget for PEG access if that's the path that we decide to take. And so we have to consider what level of service does the town want from LexMedia. We've gotten used to a certain level of service. Do we want to continue the same level of service? Is the town willing to accept less service, less coverage of board and committee meetings, other town events, less funding for public programming being developed by town residents at LexMedia? We basically have to decide at some point what level of coverage does the town choose to afford for PEG access. And so this is something that we don't have to decide today, certainly, but as we begin to put the contract in place, we want to make sure that it's got some flexible terms going forward in terms of what the periods of funding are. In the current contract, we had a 3.5-year period followed by 2 3-year periods. Do we want to have the funding periods be shorter? In a new contract, do we want to be flexible about how much funding we provide from one period to the next? Those are the kinds of decisions that we're going to have to make going forward before we actually get the contract written up and agreed to by both parties. So again, these are not decisions for today, but decisions for really sometime this spring. So what are our next steps? Well, first of all, we'd like to get the board's concurrence that the grant agreement approach is the way to go with for the new contract with LexMedia, so we can avoid the full competitive RFP process. And now there are a number of things that the CAC will be continuing to work on in terms of developing the new contract with LexMedia and also wrapping up the current contract with LexMedia and doing the performance evaluation that's part of that. So we've already begun the performance evaluation process, and we're hoping that the feedback that we get as part of that process will inform the requirements and some of the terms and conditions that go into the new contract with LexMedia. And assuming that we are going to do this as a grant agreement and not as a competitive RFP, the CAC will work with LexMedia. We'd like to develop a range of funding and service scenarios, including both steady state funding and various level of funding and service reductions, so that the town can consider these as we decide what actually is going to go into the new contract. And we're going to continue to work with the purchasing folks to develop the grant agreement contract itself. And of course, we will keep you folks informed on an ongoing basis as we do this. Our goal is to have a smooth transition to a new contract with LexMedia by July 1st. So I thank you for your attention, and Rita and I will take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pogren. I appreciate the presentation. Questions or comments from the board? We'll start with Mr. Pato.
So for a long time, I was the board's liaison to the CAC, and I've been watching this iceberg approach us. I appreciate your cogent description for the board of how we have to think about funding going forward. And thank you for all that. Your committee does a wonderful job of tracking these issues and presenting really articulate directions for the town to follow.
Thank you.
In response to your questions, I think that I was not aware of this method of entering into a contract. I think it's creative and appropriate in this case. I think we've been very well served. I'm very thankful to LexMedia's recent announcement how they are going to step up their live coverage of board meetings so that residents who are concerned with coming to public meetings will be able to follow events closely. So this is near and dear to my heart, and I think we should proceed along the path you recommend.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. I'll agree with Mr. Pato. I think the grant agreement approach is appropriate in this situation. I think it will expedite the process, and we're very lucky to have LexMedia. I think they have served the community well, and I think you talked about level of service. I think it's really excellent, and we've all benefited from it. So to imagine 10 years from now what changes will have to be made, it's going to be a lot of discussion, but it's a little scary to think, what can happen in the future and how it will impact our local cable access. And I think so many people rely on it for information. I know at least 2 people are watching at home right now. Her mother and my dad. Not together, but definitely watching. But it's really it's a valued asset for the town, and appreciate all that LexMedia does. I know that we have some representatives here tonight, but I also appreciate everything the Communications Advisory Committee is doing,
Thank you.
Which used to be called the Cable Advisory Committee many years ago. I was thinking maybe we need to change it to the Wireless Advisory Committee at some point. But much appreciated, and I think this is a good solid path forward. Ms. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Lucente. So I think this is a great way to move forward, but I have a question for Mr. Malloy. So, Mr. Malloy, the grant agreement would be signed by whom? Would it be signed by the board or by you?
The Board of Selectmen usually.
Okay, so I'm just concerned that you're a bunch of volunteers, and it sounds like you have a huge amount of work on your plate to accomplish in the next 3-ish months. So is there a provision to have like an interim agreement if you're not ready to sign on the dotted line? Let me finish.
Oh, sure.
And my other part is pay attention to our meeting schedule, which is already published for June.
Okay.
So that we don't miss something, because we tend to want to take vacations.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So we have been in close contact with Liz Mancini, the purchasing director, And she has assured us that we are on track, especially for not doing a competitive RFP, that we're on a reasonable track to develop this and have a new contract in place by the end of June. If we don't, there is the bolt hole that town meeting authorized a 10-year contract, and we've had a 9.5-year contract. So if you needed to get squeeze a few more months out of the existing contract, we could. That's not a favored approach because we'd rather keep the contract aligned with fiscal year boundaries. It just makes everything a lot easier. So far so good, and we believe that we're on course. Certainly we're going to complete the performance evaluation under the current contract, and you know, once we know that we're going to do the grant agreement, we can start thinking about, you know, we can then begin actually negotiating and discussing with LexMedia what needs to be in the requirements for the new contract. Each time that we've done the renewal of the current contract, so the 2 renewal terms, each time we've tweaked the requirements somewhat as we've gained experience with how things actually work under the contract. I've always been a great believer in having a contract reflect how things actually work, and that keeps everyone in compliance. And so we've done that, and I think we're at a point where, modulo just a few things that have changed. The requirements that are in the current contract are quite a reasonable starting point for the requirements in the new contract.
Okay, I just want to make sure with everything that's swirling around in the world right now, we're going into town meeting season.
Right.
We don't lose sight of the timeline. And I will add to the comments that my colleagues have already said about LexMedia. Some of them are here in the audience. Good evening, welcome, good to see you. I can't imagine having a December without spending some time, and my colleagues will know what I'm talking about, at LexMedia while they have us do all kinds of crazy things for their holiday show. We can show the photos later, but anyway, but thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Mr. Sandin.
Yes, and I happen to be the current liaison to the Communications Advisory Committee, and so I've had the privilege of attending these meetings and seeing the iceberg coming for a little bit. And so I appreciate the comprehensive analysis that you've done, and the dollars and cents and the direction that you're proposing. I think maybe perhaps for the folks at home, we might have a statement from the folks from LexMedia about, I believe they're affirmative about this direction, but I think it might be good to have them say a word or two along that lines.
Thank you, Mr. Sandin. So we'll move on unless there's further questions or comments from the board. Oh my goodness, Ms. Hay, I am sorry. I'm sorry.
Threw you when I had to recuse myself for 5 minutes, I know.
It's true.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you. I think you obviously are putting an enormous amount of work on this. I also want to publicly thank Ms. Mancini. I think this is at least the second time that I have seen her come up with something that's a very creative approach, that it just, sort of shows a real breadth of knowledge of options within the purchasing law, and I'm impressed. I think this is a great way to go, so I certainly am in favor of that. And then finally, I just want to say that I feel in many ways we've been lucky, as you have said, because we've had super consumers of cable in town, but LexMedia is an invaluable service to us, and I think that we've had 10 years of getting it without having to put it into our budget, and if we have to, in the future, find a way to move it into the budget, I think it is, in fact, a vital service. So those are my thoughts. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Questions or comments from the audience? Mr. Shaw, who is the chairman of the LexMedia Board.
Hi, good evening. Jim Shaw, chairman of the board.
It's still not on. Flip the switch up or down.
You think I would notice by now? Hello, there we go. Jim Shaw, chairman of the board of LexMedia. I've been the chairman since November. I was a vice chair for 5 or 6 years before that. At the risk of sounding, what's the word I'm looking for, confident, we concur with the CAC on the process that they want to approach in terms of the grant process versus the RFP. We've been providing a tremendous service to the community, and I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. I'm actually bragging on behalf of Florence Del Santo and the staff at LexMedia, who have gone above and beyond over the course of the last several years, right up and through today, where they're having discussions at LexMedia to see how we can be more service to the community in light of the issues with surrounding coronavirus. So, we do agree. And I would like to also say that over the last several years, we've also developed a very, very good and close working relationship with the CAC. We've been meeting with the CAC fairly regularly as of late to talk about this. So we too see the iceberg that's heading in our direction. And we're open to whatever discussions are necessary to make sure that we can continue to provide this service that we do for this community. Picking up on what Selectman Barry had to say, or Select Board Member Barry, I'm sorry. LexMedia is prepared to do whatever we have to do to meet the deadline for July, because we also agree that we'd like to get it done and settled and not have to worry about it going forward. So with that, I might just say hi to Marie Hill and to John Lucente watching at home. If you have any questions for LexMedia, I'm here. And again, Florence Del Santo, our Executive Director, is here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Appreciate it. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Okay, seeing none, I would like to thank both of you for coming in this evening and the other members of the committee as well for all your hard work. And we look forward to updates. And as Ms. Barry indicated, let us know when the next step is for review, and we'll be eagerly waiting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll move on to our third item on the agenda this evening, which is for the board to have a discussion and receive an update on the police station location. As the board is aware, there's been ongoing discussions related to the location of the proposed new police station and a number of presentations in the recent past. One item the board has asked for is some confirmation regarding the Historic District Commission's position on and consideration of a design that would allow for the demolition of the entire existing police station and construction of an entirely new building. The HDC did make a vote on March 5th, 2020. I was here in the audience, and they're unanimously consented to consider a demolition project as long as their guidelines were met. And they will be forwarding a formal letter, I believe, to the board, but that was what happened on the meeting at the 5th. So Mr. Cronin and Chief Core are also here if you want to make any comments or questions about the project. I will add for the board, one thing that did come up at the meeting was their main concern, rather than keeping walls or keeping any structures, that the campus looks and feels the way it does now, and that their main concern is really about how the building fits in versus preserving the brick that's currently there on the two facades. So that's where they stood in a public meeting on this topic. So, Mr. Cronin.
Thank you. To belabor that last point just a little bit, in the previous version of the schematic design, the design team worked intimately with the HDC to come up with that feel and that look. That would be the same case for this next design. We'd follow the same process. We had small working groups. We had small numbers of members of the HDC present at a design meeting where they put ideas back and forth. And the product that we put forward to the board for the next round, I think we'll have that same flavor. So we'll certainly have their input as part of the integral design.
And I'll just reiterate, one other point is we're looking, if this moves forward this evening, the next big thing is schedules. And how frequently will our board see this? How frequently will the HDC be seeing this, the Permanent Building Committee, the Design Advisory Committee, the Sustainability Committee? So we're looking at, I believe, Mr. Malloy and Mr. Cronin and Chief Core and I will be looking at just a starting point of a schedule so that can be, we want everybody on the same page with the schedule for this project, so there's no surprises about what's happening when and how much community outreach is going to be. So I believe tonight we're looking for feedback from the board and positive vote toward moving the police station or project forward and having the location be designated as its current location with a new building. So questions or comments from the board? I have already said my part. Ms. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Lucente. So before I give my feedback, I just have a question. I noticed this evening, sitting at the table here looking at this agenda item, that a document has been added to it that we were not made aware of that says one-page solar. And I don't know who put that there or why it's there, because I thought tonight we were just talking about location.
I had not seen that, Ms. Barry, until just now, so I don't know.
So it's a semi-related document, and all it really shows is what the solar capacity would be on Bedford Street versus Mass Ave. I put it on there. Mike sent it to me last week, and I didn't. He said, here's some info you might want to just forward to the board, and I don't believe I forwarded it to the board, so I thought I would just put it in the packet.
Okay. So in my mind, I think solar is a conversation for later. I think because that can confuse this entire thing, because I think what we're trying to establish right now is the location. And then we can have the conversation, which I'm going to predict right now is not going to be an easy one, about if we're going to put solar in the parking lot in either place. And I'm going to say people are probably going to have more feelings about it in one place than the other. So anyway, so that being said, when you came back to us a few months ago with the project, and it came back with $30 million, roughly 30, that got down to $28 million cost, I was one of the members of the board that was taken aback by that. And so I was one of the people that asked you to go back and look at the pricing and evaluate the two locations, because I felt very strongly that if we were asking the question, this question was going to be asked of us by the community and by town meeting before we even got that far. And so I appreciate the fact that you did go back and take a look. I appreciate the fact that during that process, you did look at demolishing the building and did have the conversation with HDC about would it be possible to demolish. I did watch the HDC meeting on TV last week, so I saw their entire conversation, so I understand where they're coming from. I did also ask for you to squeeze that building as much as you could in terms of price. As you know, well, previous members of this board may have been fans of parking inside. I'm not a favor of parking vehicles inside if it's going to cost us $2 or $3 million. So at this time, I can support the police station being at 1575 Massachusetts Avenue. However, I am still waiting for information on cost modeling, which obviously we don't have because we don't have a cost if we're going to build from scratch. And the second part is I really, really, really would like you to push to squeeze that building as much as you can, because I am concerned when this goes out to be a debt exclusion, if it's out there at the same time with the firing range, even though we anticipate the firing range is going to get public dollars or grant dollars or whatever, people aren't going to see that in their mind. So you kind of made a commitment when you were here last time that 25 million would be the high water mark. You know, if you want to lower that number too, I'm good with that. But at this time, I can support 1575. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barry. Mr. Sandine?
I too want to reiterate those comments that appreciate the look that you took and the architect took at how to improve the design of the police station. And as I may have mentioned previously, I think we have a highly efficient design here, not only from an energy perspective, but from, more importantly, I would suggest, from the way we're actually utilizing the building. So one of the things that we've seen by this new design that was presented to us is that the officers in the force will have a better facility based on this design, and they'll be able to be working better together. I think that's one of the most important parts of how we design our buildings, is to make sure that it's appropriate for the program, for the people that are going to be in the building. And so I greatly appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that it's more efficient from the perspective of the number of square feet that we had. Before we had 34,000 square feet. Now we have something like a little less than 30,000 square feet. And so that's a significant savings, not only in first cost, but also in operating costs for the building. And I think that's a fabulous outcome. So I'm very much thinking that we've made the right decision for the town by looking carefully at this, comparing to 173 and 1575, but think we should be moving forward with 1575.
Thank you, Mr. Sandine. Ms. Hay?
Thank you,
members.
Mr. Lucente. So I definitely support the building at 1575. I think that with a purpose-built new construction, we get the building that we need in the location that we have clearly heard better serves the community. And by building from scratch, we don't need to compromise in order to accommodate an artificial edifice. So I think we sort of have a win in three directions on this. So I wholeheartedly support this location.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato.
Thank you. So I too was a member of the board who pushed back because I was concerned about not only the price but also the massing of the building and a couple other issues. For me, the most important issues here are that we are meeting the programmatic needs of the PD, that we are creating a building that maximizes our new sustainable building policy goals, that we apply universal design concepts to make the building accessible for all, and that we minimize the cost. I think that this process, while it may have felt painful at times, and maybe even a surprise that there was pushback, has been very important and very successful. Because I believe that we have a much more efficient building, as Mr. Sandin says, and even though we don't have a full design, the sense of the design directions are one that I think the community is going to be more receptive to and will fit more cleanly with this location. It gave me the opportunity also to realize that the community has a preference for it to be here. And as long as we can meet these objectives and create the right building, so much the better. So I too, am satisfied with keeping it here. I am concerned about process, and concerned is the wrong word. Well, I watched the HDC meeting as well, and one of the things that I took from that was that not all of the members actually were up to speed with the proposals. That while I think it is efficient to meet with a small group to work on it, checkpoints with the full commission would be a good thing. I do worry that keeping it here opens the door to a lengthier process. It's already been lengthy, but it is the commission has very clear sense of place for the historic district, and if you don't get it right, it's going to take a lot of iterations. So going back and forth, I think, is a very good idea, and it is important to get the read of the commission as a whole, not just two members. The letter we received previously came to us from the chair of the commission, but couldn't represent the commission as a whole because last Thursday was the first time the commission as a whole met and discussed this in open session. Until they've done that, there is no sense of the commission. So, long response, but the immediate question is the location. I think we have the right location, and going forward, let's make sure we're in lockstep so that we don't create additional barriers. With regard to Ms. Barry's comments, I agree. The solar task canopies was something that entered into my mind. In either location, it's going to be a challenge. In the file that Mr. Malloy put out there, I do notice that the canopy design at 173 only dealt with 2/3 of the property. A third of the property wasn't included in the design. So whenever we do something there, I'd like us to think about the whole property.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. I'm not sure I made this clear, but I'm completely in favor of having it in its current location. I didn't say that. And I hear Ms. Barry's question and concern about the underground parking, and I think part of that has to be a discussion that we're included on at some level of, does that make sense? What are the cost benefit of that? And that's the type of thing I think as a board, we don't want to be having that discussion in August. We want to be having that discussion on the early end so that we're all on the same page with what the project is going forward and what elements are included and excluded so there's no surprises. So one of my goals is to make sure that no one on the board is surprised at any point in the process. So I will do my best to make sure that that happens over the next 6 to 12 months. Okay. Questions? Mr. Malloy, did you have anything you wanted to add to this? Okay. Mr. Cronin? Okay. Questions or comments from the audience on this item? Okay. Mr. Shaw.
Is this on? Good. I don't have to mess with it again. I'm actually here as a media past chair of the Lexington Chamber of Commerce, and I just wanted to inform the board that the Chamber of Commerce has voted unanimously to support the idea of keeping the police station in Lexington Center at its current location. Nothing more to add about that unless you have questions, but we are enthusiastic for that position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Appreciate it. Okay, seeing no further questions or comments from the audience, I'm going to make a motion to approve the new police station at the existing location at 1575 Massachusetts Avenue. Is there a second? Moved and second, and all in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you all. Thank you both for coming in this evening. Appreciate it. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our fourth item on the agenda, which is for the board to review and potentially approve the Memorandum of Understanding between the Town of Lexington and the proponents of the 1050 Waltham Street BHGRP 1050 Waltham Owner LLC. We're being joined tonight by Ed Grant, who's of counsel for Nicholson, Streeter, and Gilgun, PC, and Kevin Sheehan from Greatland Realty Partners. Mr. Sheehan, did you want to say anything, or are you here just to answer questions? I don't know who's going to give
I can
Mr.
give
Malloy
a brief introduction update unless you want to go first, Jim.
I'd be happy just to run through really quickly
That would be helpful.
what's in the
Thank you, Mr.
agreement. I did email out some edits earlier today, and I'll just run through those first quickly and then go through the agreement itself. So in Section 2, Roman numeral 2, a letter, or number 2, the words defined as the building and parking garage were deleted after the word the project because it was actually defined in a previous paragraph, so that it was unnecessary. The second change was in Roman numeral 2, Section A4, the funds that the proponent would pay if they ceased the shuttle bus were not identified as to where they would be deposited. Therefore, I've added funds are to be deposited into the Transportation Demand Management / Public Transportation Stabilization Fund. In Roman numeral 2B3, there was an extra service in the second to last sentence, so I deleted it so it reads better. And then throughout the document where it referenced the town engineer or his designee, those were changed to the town engineer or their designee. And then in Section 7.3, the specific references to Eversource were removed and replaced with the utility company, as well as the reference to Eversource's EV charger program details, as they were not only really unnecessary in the agreement itself, but they could change. And so those are the changes that were emailed out today. The agreement otherwise provides a number of different things: bicycle parking and locker room, shower facilities for employees, $2,000 per parking space over the existing number of parking spaces for the parking garage, with an estimated payment of $360,000 up to 416 parking spaces, and then $4,000 per parking space up to a maximum of 475. Parking spaces would generate another $236,000. There would be a $5,000 per year payment to L'Express, shuttle service for employees to be that will also be available for at least a 6-month trial period when there are vacant seats to residents at a charge. This was something that was requested by residents at the last select board meeting. A range of transportation mitigation items under the TDM obligations, pedestrian safety improvements, traffic mitigation potential of an additional $50,000 if studies indicate transportation improvements are necessary if the town prefers to use the funds for transit programs, trails connecting to Brookhaven, $5,000 per year for trail maintenance and management, $5,000 per year for each laboratory tenant. There would initially be 10 plus 10 additional EV charging stations, and then a solar photovoltaic canopy on the garage roof if it's operationally and financially feasible. And so this all is obviously in addition to what the increased property taxes would be that would be generated on the property. Oh, and the other thing that I put in here is that the planning board did approve the project unanimously at their March 4th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Mr. Sheehan, did you want to add anything?
I think Jim pretty much said it all. So we hope that I guess we feel that we've had a pretty good process with review with the town and with the community and with the planning board. And we feel that with the changes that Jim has described, that the MOU is final, and we hope you agree, and we're ready to sign and move toward the town meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Questions or comments from the board? Ms. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Lucente. So I support your project, and I really want to sign this MOU tonight, but I do have a problem with an item on page 7. Under paragraph 7, sustainability, paragraph 1, the very last sentence which is there, which was not in the last document that had been emailed to us the end of February by Mr. Malloy. So I'm not sure who put this in here, and I'm going to ask my colleagues that it be removed. And it says, furthermore, the owner will review and evaluate the project in comparison to the integrated building and design policy that has been adopted by the Sustainable Lexington Committee. So that policy was, I don't know if the Sustainable Lexington adopted it. That's a joint policy of the Select Board and the School Committee. It applies to municipal and school buildings. And I'm not sure why we would put a statement like this in an MOU. Why? There's no, I just don't understand it. So Mr. Malloy, do you know where that came from?
Mr. Malloy.
My understanding is it came from the discussion at the planning board, and maybe the proponent can respond better to that.
Mr. Sheehan.
Yep, we had discussed with this group at the last meeting of the select board, and also with the planning board, what further commitments we could make, to measure the sustainability of this development. And so we added a few things to the sustainability section in general. This came from a meeting that we did with representatives from the Sustainable Lexington Committee, which was a very helpful sort of brainstorming session for us as a proponent and the design team for the project, thinking about ways where, we can, demonstrate a commitment and not necessarily follow the exact same standard as a municipal building, but just measure the project in a way that we're more or less doing this anyway, because my understanding from a review of the policy is that it is very similar to a LEED checklist policy. So, we thought this would be helpful. If you disagree, we're happy to remove this sentence.
So I'm going to lobby my colleagues for, I feel this doesn't need to be in here. I think, the fact that it talks about building to LEED Silver does it for me. And furthermore, that policy is not a policy of Sustainable Lexington. So that's my only comment. Otherwise, I'm happy to sign tonight.
Okay, Mr. Sandin.
So to Ms. Barry's comment, I too agree. It's not a policy that's adopted by the Sustainable Lexington Committee. It's a policy that's adopted by the Select Board and the School Committee. So I would be supportive of this sentence if it was adjusted to say adopted by the appropriate boards and committees. The thought process of the integrated building design policy was the integrated building design policy is a critical part of the getting to net zero emissions plan for the town, and the idea is that the town would be showing leadership in the way it does its buildings as a way of having conversations with commercial developers to say, these are the kinds of things that we are doing in the town of Lexington, and we would encourage you to look at those same kind of standards yourself. It's not a requirement that the proponents do those things, but it is, I think, a helpful thing to be saying, here's the standards we're holding ourselves to, and we'd ask that you take a look at them as well. So I'll move on to my other comments. I really appreciate all the work that you've done on this project over, I don't know, 10 or 15 different sessions I've actually attended where you've been presenting the building over the last year or so. And I am very impressed with the transportation part of the project, that the breadth and depth of the commitments you've made from a transportation perspective are pretty impressive. And I thank you for your commitment to the sustainability features that we've been talking about, as well as the walkability and bikeability to the area. I would ask one comment. I'm not sure whether it's to town manager or the proponent. The town manager mentioned that there's increased tax revenue expected. Is there some estimate of what that might be?
There was an estimate that Mr. Sheehan provided at a previous meeting. I don't have it on the tips of my fingers right now.
It's approximately 1.5 million annual, net new.
Thank you. So I am in support of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandin. Ms. Hay.
So thank you, and I also like the project a lot. The one question that I have that I feel is sort of still out there, we received a copy of a letter that was sent to you from residents of Brookhaven with several questions about the impacts and effects both on them as neighbors, but also questions about the project. And I'm just wondering if you've had a chance to respond to those questions, if you have anything you can share with us on that. It was dated March 2nd, so I think we got copies of it, I think, just in the last day or two, but it was addressed to you March 2nd.
Yep, we received that in advance of the last meeting with the planning board, and we think we addressed a lot of the comments in the memo that we submitted to the planning board and at the presentation. But if there's any, we did not write a specific response back to that letter, but we didn't have time to do that before the planning board. But we know we have a few more meetings to go here before the town meeting, and we're happy to continue to respond to questions and comments.
Okay, I think that would be helpful. I mean, I think largely the concerns about transportation and traffic will be worked out generally as you progress through this, because those are well within the planning board's purview and usual concerns. I guess the question that that remains for me, well, there are a few things, but one is I know that they raised some questions about shadows and height and things, and were you able to give them any answers or assurances? Is there anything you can share with us and with the people who are listening tonight?
Yeah, in terms of height, we did talk about that at the planning board, and so I think our presentation has been relatively clear on the height difference between the Brookhaven buildings and the Brookhaven property and the 1050 Waltham Street property. We also did a shadow study at different times of year, and just to evaluate the impact on the property, and came to the conclusion that the shadow impact was relatively minimal at different times of year. And again, we're happy to review that. I think all of that was submitted to the planning board as part of our review process.
I think that probably will also be helpful to have available to town meeting. Those are the types of questions we've heard in the past, and I know town meeting will want to know. So I think if you can be prepared with answers to all of the questions that were in their memo, I think that will help the conversation. Otherwise, I do think it's a good project. I think it will help the community, and I'm grateful for certainly many of the things in here, particularly around transportation, including the access for residents in the deadheading, so to speak. So thank you.
Ms. Hay, before you wrap up, do you mind addressing Ms. Barry's concern about the integrated building and design policy? I'm just trying to get a feeling for what the board is as a whole.
As I read this, it seemed to me that it was really sort of a not necessary, but not harmful as long as we change, which I apologize, I didn't even notice, who adopted it. It was adopted by the town. It wasn't adopted by, the Sustainable Lexington Committee. But I think the way it's worded, it's there as a yardstick for them to use as a reference. I don't think it holds them to that particular policy. It says that they will evaluate it in comparison to. It doesn't give a particular standard for that comparison, so I'm comfortable with the sentence in there as long as we change the end to as adopted by, and it can either say the town of Lexington or the board, or the select board, although I think when we adopted it, we were still the Board of Selectmen. Joint policy, I'm sorry. So so then I would leave it as adopted by the town of Lexington.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato.
So I'll address that first. I think that making the change Ms. Hayes suggests is appropriate, and given that the project sponsors are okay with this language, I would keep it. I think it is useful as a model for future discussions, that tying to our goals, which are more specific than just a generic LEED. You can accomplish LEED without doing a lot of these sustainability goals and still get the same levels of LEED. So this is clearer, and it helps set a community aspiration. But I agree, we'll just edit the language. The rest of it, I think this provides appropriate compensation for the additional traffic and issues that are within the purview of this board, and I support this MOU.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. So I support this MOU. I think this is a good project, and I think there's clearly a number of benefits for the town doing this, and appreciate your continued working with the town on very proactively working with the town and addressing any concerns. So I do really, we recognize that and appreciate the effort that's gone in. My take on this sentence under the sustainability is that it's a very weak sentence, and I'm not quite sure why the town would benefit from this being there. If they're doing LEED Silver, and then the integrated building and design policy isn't LEED Silver, it's some of the points are different. I'm not sure what we gain as a community by asking this review and evaluation to happen. I understand if the proponents are happy to do it, that's great. What happens though is we do tend to, with these MOUs, keep the same language year after year. And to me, this is, if I were the proponent, I would say this is kind of confusing because I'm building to LEED Silver version 4, but I also have this other policy that's a local policy that we're trying to measure ourselves against, but without any consequence for measuring poorly or great against it. So I'm confused by this. I think I'm with Ms. Barry on this one. I would strike the sentence altogether. If not that, I would definitely take out the Sustainable Lexington Committee line at the end, but that's where I stand. But I think I heard from the board, 2 of us maybe think the sentence should go, and 3 think, okay. Does the other members, so we can move forward with this MOU, do other members of the board feel, what's the strength of feeling about this? Mr. Sandine.
So my only comment would be to your comment about LEED Silver. The integrated building design policy is not about LEED Silver. It's about are we going to maximize the amount of solar on the property? Are we going to be designing to energy efficiency that's 30% better than code? Are we going to be designing to I'm not remembering all of the points at this particular point in time, but these are the things that we're doing for our own buildings that are above and beyond LEED Silver. So I think it's helpful so people aren't surprised coming in to the kinds of standards we're holding ourselves to. That was sort of the idea of putting the integrated building design policy in place as part of the getting to net zero emissions policy. We're going to be looking, and we're going to be needing as a community to be moving towards a world where all of our buildings are zero emissions. renewable energy. So purchasing of renewable energy is also one of the points here. So I think it's helpful for proponents to know what we are holding ourselves to, and that we're giving that. It's not just. It gives them some certainty in terms of how they're coming into the process.
I think I still don't, and maybe someone can clear this up for me. Maybe I'm just missing it. But when I read language in an MOU that says the owner will review and evaluate the project in comparison to this policy that we've adopted as a town. Okay, and then what? What happens next? They do a review and they say, we've done this, and then they turn it into us and we give them a grade? I mean, I don't honestly don't know what we're supposed to do with it.
So this is the same process we use in the town.
But we're building the town's building. It's our building that we're building. We're holding ourselves to that policy and the standards of that policy versus they're just sort of doing a benchmarking. I don't know what the exercise is for, so maybe if someone could clear it up in my head, I would be more supportive of it.
Well, I think it's two things. One is if you're going to do a benchmark, it goes into your design process as you're thinking about going forward. And this gives a clearer articulation of what it is that we value in this community. Secondly, benchmarking is actually an important thing. It lets us understand how our town as a whole is building out relative to our ambition to get to net zero in a reasonable number of decades. So I believe that even though this is a relatively weak requirement, it doesn't impose specific performance requirements on you, it does provide a model and it provides a means for the town to understand how is our built out environment moving forward. So sadly, I think we're wasting the proponents' time here because this really has nothing to do with their concerns. And
I think the concern Ms. Berry posed, though, is beyond their concerns, because these things, as I said, tend to have a life of their own, and it's the next project that we're going to say, well, it was in the last one we did. You have to put it in, and that.
So I will say in the 186 MOU, we did not reference this, and this policy was in place. We referenced something else. We referenced I think it was the getting to net zero policy.
Yeah,
So we seem to have a moving target here. Is part of the thing. Is part of my concern. And again, it's to what end? We're asking them to do this, and then what? I would think they've said they're going to do it anyway. I take him at his word. They're going to look at it and do it.
so I guess this is somewhat of our ambition of what we're asking for from applicants who are looking for a zoning change. 186, my recollection is we were in the process of finishing that policy, which took us a very long time to nail down, and the MOU had been negotiated in parallel. So, yeah, it would have been nice to have had this in that policy, but it wasn't really ready. At this point, I think it is ready, and I think I would like to have this as being a step for the future.
So at this point, so we don't waste any more of their time, I'm willing to withdraw my request. However, I think it's imperative that that policy is referred to as it's named. It is the Integrated Building Design and Construction Policy, not the Integrated Building and Design Policy. So if you make that change and we take out the part about Sustainable Lexington Committee, I can support this. And in the future, it would be helpful if we don't, if this is, it just seemed like I thought we were getting pretty much a set MOU. And Mr. Malloy, I know I gave you some minor edits tonight that had to do with gender neutral language and things like that. But there were a few other things in here that were significantly different from when we saw this last MOU. And MOUs, I think, are becoming a bigger problem for us because they should be being negotiated by one or two parties, and then they're coming to us and we're bringing up all kinds of issues with them. But that's a whole conversation I believe Mr. Malloy wants to have down the line after we have passed this one. And I think we need to do that. So I'm willing to withdraw my request if the wording gets corrected to be comparison to the Integrated Building Design and Construction Policy that has been adopted by the town of Lexington.
Is the board in concurrence with that?
Yes.
Okay, so,
Yes.
all right, so we will, we'll now move on to questions or concerns from the audience. You can come up to the microphone, sir. And if you could state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is John Howard. I'm a resident of Brookhaven. I'll try to take only 1 minute. I have a very specific suggestion to make. I'm in favor of the project as a whole. I think it's great for Lexington. The maximum height, including roof-type structures, is 80 feet in the zoning, but only 72 feet in what the developers have proposed to us and have shown in the shadow studies and so on. And I think that 8-foot difference is significant. I think that it makes the building slightly higher than the surrounding terrain and buildings rather than slightly lower. Makes it stand out for people entering Lexington and increases shadowing at Brookhaven in particular. So I'd like to ask that you consider modifying the zoning language, the specific number in the zoning, to be 72 feet rather than 80 feet, since the developers aren't actually planning to building taller than that anyway.
That's
might
Mr.
comment on that,
Mr. Grant.
Mr. Chairman. We worked very hard on the height issue and reduced it, and Kevin modified the height maximum at 55 feet for the building and 80 feet including rooftop structures. Before there was a definition, we had a lot of discussion with the planning board. The Brookhaven height, just in comparison, is 65 feet with a 70-foot max. He reduced it and clarified the definition, and the 72, I think, that Mr. Howard refers to is what he's trying to do. He's trying to make it lower than 80 feet. Am I correct, Kevin?
Yep.
You want to have anything to add to that? And the planning board has approved this, our dimensional controls, et cetera. We've given a lot of time and thought and spent time with Brookhaven showing perspectives, including, as Kevin said before, screening and and shading and the like.
You've been working with the planning board on this
Right.
topic. I think this is outside the scope of the MOU at hand because it's a planning board item and a decision at that level. And I think as a community, we'll have to decide whether we want the project or not. But Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, I would just add that, we think that we resolved this with the planning board, but we also understand the comments about, and we hear the comments from the community, that we really need to demonstrate what are the impacts of this, the height of this building that we anticipate. I'd say the main thing from the zoning perspective is the flexibility. There might be a couple of chimneys or smokestacks that exceed the 72, which really we don't, we expect those will fully develop as the building design is complete. But we don't expect, what we are showing at the 72-foot height limit is what we really expect the height of the building to be. And like Ed said, we're going to continue to work toward that on the design and through our site plan review with the planning board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Ms. McKenna.
Don McKenna at 9 Hancock Street. And I'll just be very quick, and this has nothing to do with this project directly, other than I know that you're providing $5,000 for L'Express. I just want to remind the board that when I was chairman of the board, we implemented a policy that really did a much better job of providing longer-term stability to L'Express. That policy has been rolled back. And in the intervening years, we've gotten less and less contributions. And as funding gets tighter, I would ask that the board look at that again and that model. Nothing to do affecting this particular project. But I do think it's important that we look to that model again, because we had in line that we were pretty well on our way to fully sustaining L'Express, and we should take another look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKenna. If you want to come to the microphone, sir.
My name is Thomas Bryan, and I'm a resident
If you could
of
just
Brookhaven.
speak in the mic. And,
Okay, my name is Thomas Bryan, and I'm a resident of Brookhaven. I'd like to deal with the traffic and the transportation issues, which we still think have not really been thoroughly resolved. On the traffic issue, we note that they have changed their driveway as a one-way circular entering north and entering south and exiting north. By exiting north, that puts the north exits very close to our Brookhaven entrance, our only Brookhaven entrance. And that raises a problem for the reaction timing of drivers coming out of Brookhaven, many of whom are elderly. So we have great concern about whether or not we might have a few accidents as a result of this. Could they, in effect, turn it around, enter north, and exit south? That would give a lot more room. We also strongly recommend that they put requirements on their tenants to have staggered hours, because that would really take a heavy drain off this traffic situation, which, as you know, is driven by the fact that so many people use Waltham Street as a workaround around the Route 128 traffic jams. So if that could be done, that might be a self-action that could make a tremendous benefit. And also lengthening the left turn lanes would also allow more cars to get into the left turn lanes and maybe allow better flow. And if the traffic gets difficult, I think we feel pretty strongly you may need to look at the need for traffic cops, at least during rush hours, because this could be a significant choke point with 400 cars moving in and out of that property. On the transportation
30 seconds,
issue,
Mr. Bryan. 30
Yes.
seconds.
Okay, we think they should be adding more dough to Lexpress, seriously more dough, because it's very important for the employees of this building to get access to the MBTA bus system, and Lexpress is the only way to do it. We applaud the Red Line, and we also like the idea that the Alewife Express, we're happy that they're going to allow residents like ourselves to pay to use it. We're happy to do that, as long as we improve the movement of people to the mass transit system, because we're going to have more employees there, and in order to help us access the mass transit system, we need better bus services.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Appreciate the comments. Any further comments or questions from the audience? Okay, seeing none. Board members, is everyone at a point of comfort with signing this memorandum of understanding? Okay, so let me find the motion. Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding between the town of Lexington and BHGRP 1050 Waltham Owner LLC as attached and as amended. Yeah, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second, and all in favor? Aye. Okay, before,
If I could, I do have a copy for you to sign here, because I guessed what you were going to edit it to read. And so it does on page 7 now read, furthermore, the owner will review and evaluate the project in comparison to the integrated building design and construction policy that has been adopted by the town of Lexington. So there's 3
well,
copies
thank
here
you.
for you to sign.
Well, why don't we take a 1-minute recess so we can sign this while Mr. Sheehan is here and we can get this done. So we're just going to take a 1-minute recess. Bring the board back to order. Our 5th item on the agenda this evening is for the board to discuss and potentially approve the placement of a World War II memorial plaque for Cary Memorial Building. At the board's December 16th meeting, Mr. George Gamata presented the Citizens World War II commemorative group's plans for events to be held in 2020, commemorating the 75th anniversary of the ending of World War II. Tonight, the board is being asked to discuss the Citizen World War II commemoration group's request that a memorial plaque be placed and installed in the Cary Memorial Building next to the existing World War I memorial plaque to recognize the 62 Lexingtonians who died in service in World War II. For the board's discussion, attached to our packet were the minutes from the town's Monuments and Memorial Committee, which contains their recommendation to the board of the select board to grant the request from the World War II group and put up a commemoration plaque and a temporary plaque. So we do have Mr. George Gamata here with us from the Citizens World War II Commemoration Group to answer any questions that we may have this evening. But I think what we're really looking to do is see if the board has questions and if there are any, if we can move this forward so that they can get started with their plans. So, Mr. Gmata, do you have anything briefly you want to say?
Well, I'm very appreciative of the Monuments and Memorials Committee to recommending going forward. And I look forward for the Select Board to give me the go-ahead so I can start getting some estimates and raise funding. I'm very happy to see that we already got partial funding for it, so we can start going, thanks to the Lions Club. And now we're waiting for your approval, and hopefully we can get a plaque, permanent plaque, placed on Veterans Day, and we'll use a mock-up, something like this, for Memorial Day, because Memorial Day is really the day where we want to commemorate the 62 fallen from Lexington.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Gmata. Questions or comments from the board? We'll start with Mr. Sandin.
I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing on this, and I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think you should be moving forward.
Well, we're ready to go, and on May 1st will be the beginning of the activities.
Excellent. Ms. Hay.
I want to add my thanks, and I appreciate that the Monuments Memorials Committee has endorsed this as well, and I second their recommendation that this be something that parallels in design and feel to the World War I plaque, and I think that's a great idea, and I think it makes an appropriate companion, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato?
I concur. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gmata. Thanks for all the work on this. You know, as members of the board may remember, the original number of this was 59. It's now 62. My only question is there any chance the number will continue to change, or is that, are we
I
pretty
hope
certain?
it's not, because each time, but we found that 3 individuals, they were Lexingtonians, high school. Actually, we found it because they were high school graduates and went into the service, but their family moved out.
Okay.
And I consider them to be Lexingtonians. And, but it's hard work, and I have to say, Sue Staring has been extremely good. She's been going to yearbooks, libraries, and individual in finding out people from California or what have you.
Yeah.
And it's really been very satisfying, but hard work.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you for all the effort your group's putting in, because it is difficult to research 75-year-old information. It's tough. So, Ms. Barry.
Thank you. So as liaison to Monuments and Memorials, I have no questions, but I want to thank you and your committee for all your work so far, and I support this.
And thank you, Ms. Barry, for helping push this along through that process. We appreciate it. Questions or comments from the audience on this item? Okay, seeing none. I'm going to make a motion here. I don't think there was one in the packet, but it's taking some of the language that was moved from the Monuments and Memorials Committee. But I move the Select Board approve and authorize the placement of a plaque in the Cary Memorial Building with the names of the 62 Lexingtonians, all residents of Lexington at the time of their enlistment, who died in service in World War II, and that such a plaque be installed in the Cary Memorial Building to serve as an appropriate companion piece to the existing World War I plaque, and that said plaque be of a comparable design, material, and scale to the existing World War I plaque. The board further endorses the goal of placing a temporary placeholder plaque as part of the Memorial Day 2020 observation, with formal dedication of the finished plaque to be held on Veterans Day, November 11th, 2020. Is there a second? Second. Moved and second, and all in favor? Aye. Mr. Pato, before we say aye.
No, I'm in favor of this. I was just trying to follow your whole motion. It's really difficult without having a motion written for one to be that long.
So if you go to the attachment, it's actually at the very bottom of the Monuments and Memorials
Okay,
page.
in any case, I voted yes. I just...
Okay, so I was a yes. Mr. Pato was a yes. I think we're all a yes. Okay. So it is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Gamato. Good luck with the continued work on this. We look forward
Thank
to
you.
seeing it.
Now, one question, once we have an estimate, a design, do I present it to the Memorials Committee, or who makes the final decision, yay, or, or the wood should be cherry instead of mahogany, or, I mean, we're talking all design.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be the Monuments and Memorials Committee that you would do the check-in with, and please get in touch with us if there's any trouble, organizing a
Okay.
meeting, and we will try to have Ms. Barry continue to work with them on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, our sixth item this evening. Oh, goodness. Please hold. Okay. Our sixth item on the agenda this evening is to discuss the Discovery Day Street Fair 2020 request. We have with us Mr. Eric Michelson, President of the Lexington Retailers Association, to make the presentation.
Good
Mr.
evening.
Michelson.
Thank you very much. Within your packet, you should have a letter dated February 5th that outlines our request for use of town facilities for Discovery Day. To summarize, Discovery Day is this year will be held on Saturday, May 23rd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. With the street closures from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. Our request is very similar to what we made last year, shutting down Mass Avenue from Waltham Street to Merriman Street, use of Depot Square at Emery Park, Muzzy Street from Mass Avenue to the first private driveway, and Mass Avenue, the north side of Mass Avenue, basically from Edison Way to Waltham Street, where the street is not shut down. In addition, this year we have 3 things that we are asking for based upon our experience last year. First of all, we are asking for use of some portion of the visitor center lawn. Last year, one of the local companies wanted to sponsor pony rides, and we were unable to negotiate with the library access to their lawn area. And we didn't ask for the visitor center lawn because we figured that was going to be completely encompassed by the construction, but we could have actually used it. But this year we would like to work with you to do that. There won't be, it might be a second small thing there, but there will be no booths in that area. The second thing will be to ask permission to, based upon the town's banner policy, to hang a banner across Mass Avenue announcing the event, or where the Vote Now banner is. And the third change would be in the hours of the beer garden, which is held at the end of Muzzy Street. Last year it was 11 to 3. We discussed this at the wrap-up meeting with the town officials last June, and we there was consensus that if we could run it from 12 to 4, that may be a little better. Remember, we break that. The main event and the music all stops at 3, and the street reopens at 5. So that's just another area that we'd like to make a slight tweak and see how that works out. So, but I'm going to answer any questions if you have any. And I just want to say before you start that we did meet with the town manager and the representatives from all the town departments that participated in Discovery Day back on June 3rd. And we did wrap up, and we came away with some good things operationally to incorporate this year to make it a smoother event.
Thank you, Mr. Michelson. Questions or comments from the board? We'll start with Ms. Hay.
So I love Discovery Day. I love that it's back on Mass Ave. I'm a little less crazy about the pony rides, but have you had that conversation with DPW about what that's going to entail and who's going to be responsible for the tails?
So I don't mean to interrupt you. So that was one of the first questions we asked the people who wanted to do this. Was that how does this work? And they said that they use this company in Arlington for their town day, and the company is completely responsible for all cleanup. for proper treatment of the animals, for making sure they're watered, making sure the conditions are right. They'll actually, if we plan to go ahead with it, they'll come out and survey the area first of all to make sure that it is appropriate. So your concerns were our concerns. And I asked some people down at Arlington what they thought about what was left over when the event was done, and they were very satisfied.
So I'm still not thrilled on that one piece, but I think everything else, and I heard wonderful reviews of the beer garden, and so I'm on board with the rest of this. I guess I'd like to hear the board's comments. I am concerned about, how the grounds are going to be post hoc, shall we say?
Definitely.
It is an area where we have a lot of the public afterwards, and anyway.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato?
So I too think last year went extraordinarily well. I think the beer garden was a good addition, and I look forward to seeing this. I share Ms. Hayes' concerns about the pony rides. I'd want to hear confirmation from DPW before any final commitment, and I just wanted to check, is this our jurisdiction or Mr. Malloy's jurisdiction? Mr. Malloy, so this is recommendation to you. I really would like to hear strong recommendations from our staff that this would go well, because I do have some reservations. And then just lastly, I guess this is the obvious, contingency planning. Large events in the next couple of months are likely to be
definitely
planned.
I 100% agree with you. It's hard to plan for the unplannable, but I understand that, yes, definitely everything goes with what's going on in the world. Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. Mr. Michelson, thank you for organizing this. Thank you for being the leading force behind putting it back on Mass Ave. I think it's wonderful. I only got to be there for about 20 minutes of it last year, so I missed all the fun. But I got to see the setup, and I thought it was really, really well done, really well organized. I think everyone who stayed all day had a really nice time. I think the beer garden worked out. I had no concerns coming out of this. My one concern, I'll echo my colleagues, is this idea of the pony rides. And I think part of it is the location of the pony rides being a little further from the rest of the stuff, the rest of the tents and the setup, because now you're adding additional sort of walking traffic and people thinking it's connected and, where the car's turning. I think it just might add an extra element that may not be worth doing, and I know it's not our decision. The only other thing I'll add is having been involved with other outdoor events where animals were at one point a part of that event and getting a lot of negative feedback, it wasn't worth it. The amount of feedback we got about the live animals and treatment of animals, and it really brought out a whole group of folks in town that were really anti doing this. So it almost made it not worth the headache to bring live animals, for as much fun as it might be for the children. Mm-hmm. That would be one concern. The other concern would be a brand new lawn that we're just now trying to get planted and living, and it just seems weird to be having that go on. So that's my only opinion. But otherwise, I think everything is wonderful.
Just to respond to what you were saying. So our thought process, which led us in that direction, was first of all, we do have a detail officer stationed at Mass and Merriam. So crossing-wise and visibility-wise, we thought it would be an attractive area. In addition, I believe, from what I understand from Economic Development Department, is they're going to try to promote the new visitor center that day and promote the fact that the bathrooms are there now. So it is continuity. Your concerns are our concerns about the animal treatment, and we're going to dive a little deeper into this. And I'd be really willing to work with Mr. Malloy in regards to all that details.
Ms. Barry.
Thank you. I won't add to the ponies. I think you've heard it all. That didn't sound quite right, but anyway. I love Discovery Day. I was the one that got the board to have a booth that we're going to talk about next. It's been expanded to elected official booths. I think it's a great way to interface with the community. I'm thrilled it's back on Mass Ave. The other thing you mentioned was a banner The banner policy, that's also under the purview of the town manager. And the last thing is when we get to the motion here, it talks about restricting vehicular access, and I'm not sure, Mass Ave, it says north side sidewalk from Edison Way to Waltham Street, so you're just looking to use the sidewalk, correct?
Yeah, so basically, we want permission to allow the stores that are adjacent to that particular part of the sidewalk, if they choose to come out on that wide part of the sidewalk with their goods, which is normally restricted, as opposed to if they don't want them, if they don't have the staff to move down to the main part.
Right. My point is, we typically shouldn't have vehicular access on the sidewalk.
Very good
motion would
point.
need to be adjusted in our sidewalks, Mr. Malloy, as well? Yes, so, that
Yeah.
one. Otherwise,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, the letter does understand that there is split jurisdiction for this, and so it's up to you guys to have the mud wrestling match and figure it out.
Ms. Barry, were you referring to something in the motion?
Yes. The first motion to approve, not approve, restricting vehicular access, and then the third bullet point says Massachusetts Avenue, north side sidewalk.
Okay,
So just delete the third bullet point.
gotcha. Thank you. Sorry, couldn't follow. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Mr. Sandin.
So, as the other board member said, I love Discovery Day, and I've been an active participant for, I don't know, a decade or so, and it's been a fabulous event for the whole town. And I really appreciate moving to the changes you made last year to move to Mass Ave. One of the changes, which we haven't mentioned, that you made last year was to do some recycling and composting and that sort of thing. Are you going to continue that through forward?
The efforts that that group of people, I forget the exact name of the committee, did was over and above what we expected.
The Lexington Green Team.
Yes, the Green Team was fantastic. I think that the plans were to expand the number of stations to try to improve our record on composting and recycling so that we really reduce the amount of trash we generate, and I look forward to working with them, yes.
Okay. The only thing I commented the last time was that I think you should run it more than once a year. So
Well,
anyway, say that again.
Some of our businesses think it cuts into their time, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you have work to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move to questions or comments from the audience on this item. Ms. McKenna.
Don McKenna, Chairman of the Tourism Committee. So I too think the idea is great, and I did actually just meet with Casey and Casey Haggerty and Katie Johnson this morning, and they do want some continuity to entice people to come into the visitor center. In terms, I had met last week with DPW and DPF about the landscaping in front of the visitor center and how that was all going to go. And I think the plan is that they're going to do something late May, early June. So it may not be a conflict in terms of the horses, but obviously that's something that Mr. Malloy can verify and double check. The only thing I want to say, which I forgot to mention this to Mr. Michelson earlier, is I love it back on Mass Ave. It did cause disruption last year, sort of unexpectedly, because there was all new staff to the Liberty Ride, because our Liberty Ride route goes right down there. And this year, where we're doing all kinds of publicity to get people on that, I just think that the economic development staff should have an affirmative discussion about how we can manage that in a way it doesn't look like the Liberty Ride is shut down that day. And I'm not suggesting we change anything, but I just, because I know Mr. Malloy isn't, may not have been as cognizant of that, that we make sure that as you're making decisions, that's a huge priority. But it's a great event, and I personally think the ponies are great. Even if we have to move them a little further to the other side a little bit, I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. McKenna. I don't see now that you explain the visitor center connecting, I don't see anything wrong with trying to connect the visitor center. The pony part is I'm just warning you from my past experience. It caused more public outrage than it was worth. And again, maybe the public has drastically changed, but I'll also mention that we had, the little fish in a, you could win it at the carnival one year, the fish in a bag. I mean, people were not happy. There was a lot of students that signed a petition saying don't do this. So I just don't want to see any negative marks on the event for something that seems like a good idea. So.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately,
Lawn darts?
Yeah.
Oh, lawn games, even
sure.
better.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of went over this last year when the idea was floated with the company that wanted to sponsor it, and they, obviously it's obviously in your hands, but it's in their hands if we get permission. And they seem that they had so many good years in Arlington to do it. So, but I definitely am open to making sure it goes smoothly. And as for the Liberty Ride, I would suggest to Economic Development that they consider routing, down Edison Way up the back way and back onto Merriam Street, and that they could continue their service, no problem. So,
Great. Thank you, Mr. Michelson. So I'm going to make a motion. Hopefully I get it correct. My colleagues will check me if I get it wrong, but I move to approve restricting vehicular access in the following areas for the 41st Annual Discovery Day Street Fair to be held on Saturday, May 23rd, 2020 from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. Massachusetts Avenue from Waltham Street to Merriam Street, both sides, and Muzzy Street from Massachusetts Avenue to the first private driveway. And further move to approve parking a flatbed truck with the banner publicizing Discovery Day in Lexington Center on Massachusetts Avenue in 2 metered spaces in front of the Depot Square, starting on Friday, May 15th, 2020, and ending at the conclusion of Discovery Day. And further move to approve free parking at the Central Business District parking meters and not charge for parking in the Depot lot on Discovery Day. Please note, all approvals will be subject to working out the details with the Town Manager's Office, Department of Public Works, and Lexington Police Department staff. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I just want to clarify one thing in
Yes.
your motion. Our request was not only is substantial, but at least I want to bring it up. I just noted that the motion reflected our request last year, which was to use a flatbed trailer. That trailer did go away, and we had it converted to a flatbed truck. And so this year we clarified it, and it's going to be for a flatbed truck for the banner beyond, not a trailer.
Okay.
So
I think I read that flatbed truck. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Okay, it is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Michelson. Good luck.
Thank you very
with
much.
the planning.
And I'll work with everybody to get this running smoothly.
Excellent. And sticking on the topic of Discovery Day, our next item on the agenda, which is our 7th item, is to discuss the board's participation in Discovery Day for 2020. Last year, the board held shared an elected officials booth along with the school committee and the planning board. The question to the board is whether or not we think this is a worthy idea, and we should try to continue and to coordinate with the other boards. Any thoughts from the board?
I agree. I think it is very worthy. I think it's an important way for us to be present, for people to have an opportunity to ask us questions where they don't actually have to come to our office hours. And I think having it as a joint elected board table is really a lovely thing. And as long as it is as far as possible from wherever the horses end up, if the horses are there, I'm willing. I'm highly allergic to horses, so trying not to make this all about me, but if I'm nowhere near the horses, I will come to the table.
And I guess the other thing is, are people
I do,
around?
but I'm here this year.
Okay. So you're around, Mr. Pato?
Yeah, we should do
You're
this.
around and you want to do it. Okay. This is my one conflict a year that I have, that I'm not around, so I think it's a great idea, but I hate to say that and not show up. But if there's enough of us and enough of the other elected officials, then it makes it worthwhile. So, Ms. Berry?
I'm happy to participate, and I'm happy to be the setup person.
All right. That's excellent. Mr. Sandine?
I'm happy to participate as well. My only question to the chair is, have you had a chance to talk to the chairs of the other committees yet?
I have not, because as we did last year, I wanted to make sure our board wanted to do it. If we didn't, it wouldn't be worthwhile. And I'll put out the request to them while it's still early, and they can organize, and we'll set up a doodle poll or a sign-up sheet so that people can pick slots. And I think last time we did sort of 2-hour slots for 2 people, so no one was really there, stuck there all day. Some people stayed. It was very fun. Yeah. Mr. Patrick.
I was just going to say, even if the other elected boards aren't interested, we should do it. So whichever the ones join us should join us.
Okay, so that's important. Thank you, Mr. Patter. Okay, so we'll move forward with that. Okay, we're going to move on to our 8th item this evening, which is to discuss a LexHAB request for use of affordable housing stabilization funds under the 2020 annual town meeting warrant Article 19. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Malloy, who will make the presentation when he's prepared.
So LexHAB is looking to utilize funds from the annual payment that we receive from Brookhaven. It increases every year, but the amount that we received last year that exists in the fund right now is about $111,000. They are looking at from what I understand, initially they were looking at using the funds for Farm View, but now they're looking at using the funds for improvements to other properties that they have, kitchen and bathroom improvements. And so we've been requested, and town council has given an opinion that the way the warrant article is worded, that this is something that we could do. One of the questions becomes, what are the actual improvements they plan on making? And if they meet the criteria of actual capital items, then there's no need to amend the article or the fund itself. So one of the things we need to do is get some additional information on the actual improvements they plan on. If they're replacing kitchens and replacing bathrooms, that's probably a capital improvement. But if they're putting new refrigerators in, that probably does not meet the criteria of a capital improvement. So we'll have to get some more information from LexHAB on what those actual capital improvements are.
So we do have Mr. Burbidge and Ms. Martha Wood from LexHAB. I don't know if you want to come to the podium now and address sort of what the thoughts were, and also give an opportunity for any questions that might come up, if you have that information available. You can turn the microphone on to Mr. Burbidge.
Actually, we do. A few months back, we decided to put together a renovation/repair forecast for the LexHAB units. We have, as you know, we have about 70 units in town. We have 7 boards that will be coming online, hopefully in the next few months. What we've done is we've identified 32 projects, none of which involve replacing a refrigerator or a hot water heater or anything like that. But these are, you know, new flooring, roofing, carpet flooring, repairs, replacements, and so on. As I said, 32 different projects. Some are on the same property, so it isn't 32 properties. It's probably more like, I'm just looking at this quickly, 25 to 30 properties. But they all fit I would say, would fit the definition of a capital improvement. Now again, this is always a moving target. We really have no idea what we have in front of us sometimes until we get into a unit when a tenant leaves. So when we make observations, we know things that are coming along. We say, well, you know, we know this particular unit, for example, is due to have a kitchen replacement or a roof replaced and so on. So our present forecast for 2020 for properties that are not funded by any CPA funding is about $197,000. So we could certainly use that money to address these capital needs, capital expenditure needs.
Thank you, Mr. Burbidge. So questions or comments from the board on this item? Actually, Mr. Pato, I didn't start with you last time, so I'll start with you this time.
So I think this is a very helpful request, and I think these are funds that are in this primarily to create affordable housing, but part of creating affordable housing is making sure that what we have is a useful, sustainable structure. Sustainable in this case being it's been repaired. As far as I understand your request, I'm completely for it. And I think we should be looking at what other kind of use in future years we might encourage this fund to apply to. But for this year, these capital projects seem the right thing.
Thank you, Mr. Pato. I concur with Mr. Pato. I think this is a good use for this money. It was set aside from the Brookhaven project in memory of Dave Eagle, who was really a cornerstone of LexHAB. And, I think if we were to channel Mr. Eagle, he would say this is a good use for this money. And this is really what one of the intents for it was, to keep LexHAB going and keep all these projects going. And as Mr. Pato said, you can't do that. If things are deteriorating, we want to provide affordable units that are livable as well. So I would strongly support us moving forward with this. Ms. Barry.
Thank you. So I'm the liaison to LexHAB, so I'm somewhat familiar with this issue. But I think we need to clarify a couple of things. I'm going to ask Ms. Kosnoff if she can come down too, because I'm going to have some questions for her. So in 2018 at town meeting, I think it was Article 26,
yep.
We set up the Affordable Housing Capital Stabilization Fund. And that fund was set up with four purposes of what the money could be used for. The first was construction. So it was for affordable housing for construction, renovation, land acquisition, or easements. So in my conversation with town council last week, his concern somewhat was that the word capital appears in the Affordable Housing Capital Stabilization Fund. So he had some concern how Ms. Kosnoff would look at these projects and would they definitely fit your definition of capital? So that's one question. And then the second thing, to get to Mr. Pato's point, is do we want to expand those uses from the four that are there and add a fifth category or a sixth category? And would we want to do that now, which we could do under the terms of this article, or wait for a future town meeting? So I don't know if Ms. Kosnoff can address the part about the word capital.
Ms. Kosnoff.
So I don't have a concern about the word capital in this particular instance. It does say renovation. To Mr. Malloy's point earlier, I think that you can split hairs a little bit. Certain things I would think of a roof repair or a full kitchen renovation as a capital improvement. This is a cash funding item. It is not something that needs to be bonded, so we have a little bit of flexibility on our end. So in that particular case, it does not concern me. I do think that certainly, though, some things like painting, appliance replacement and things like that are more of an operating nature, and those would not necessarily fall under the fund the way that it is established now. So there's a little bit of gray area there, but for this particular purpose, I am okay with that.
Okay, and then if I can just follow up with another question. So then how would this work in terms of LexHAB wouldn't get the full chunk of 111,000, correct? It would stay here in the town and they would submit invoices up to 111,000?
So that is typically the way that we have handled any CPA appropriations, is that the town keeps the CPA money and LexHAB expends the funds, and then they submit them to us, and we will either pay the vendor directly or reimburse. So this is a new animal. We have obviously not done this before, but I would envision this working in a similar way.
Okay, thank you. So then my other question to the board is, are you comfortable with the four words that are there? Do we want to, for the purposes which LexHAB is looking for the money this year, or do we, want to defer and potentially add a fifth category at a future town meeting? Just think about that.
Mr. Sandin.
So I just want to say thank you to LexHAB. I think is one of the best organizations in the town that's doing excellent work for our residents, and I appreciate the focus on keeping these facilities in tip-top shape for our residents, and I really appreciate the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sandin. Ms. Hay.
So thank you. I certainly support the need to do this, and I just want to make sure that I'm following, because I may have missed a thread somewhere. There's $111,000 total in this account, or $111,000 in this year's influx to the account.
I believe this year was the first year that we received a payment from Brookhaven, so it was right around 111,000.
Okay, and the project, the full project cost is 197,000. So is LexHAB contributing that extra 86, or are we doing this in stages?
Any excess would be picked up by LexHAB. I mean, typically in the past, we have done we've always done all of the renovations and repairs and such. It seems recently that sometimes these things come kind of like a tidal wave. You know, things go like this for a while, and the timing is kind of at the point where this would be the right time for us to be able to use these funds. So that's kind of where we're at right now. You know, we're obviously always looking to find ways to make things better in terms of, I'm thinking of what Ms. Barry was talking about in terms of adding, you know, additional criteria to the fund. I'd be open and willing to discuss that at some point when it's appropriate. But for right now, we certainly have a lot in front of us, and this would be a great help for us.
So I certainly don't want to delay this work now, which is needed. And so I support Ms. Berry's suggestion that we expand the definition, because as your, I'm not sure what the right word I'm looking for is. You can tell it's after 9 o'clock. But as your portfolio continues to expand, your need to go back and renovate and update and maintain is going to only continue and increase. So I think that that is an important element of what you do, and I want to make sure that we don't have an impediment that was unintended in the use of this money for that purpose. In the short term, it seems like if you are doing kitchen renovations that require, in addition to floors and roofs, painting and refrigerators, that perhaps the money gets split out so that the money coming out of LexHAB is paying for those pieces. But I would support expanding the definition, but I do not want to do it in such a way that it delays doing this. So I think we need to bifurcate, unless I'm misunderstanding the process. Would it be possible to add that as well in this article this year? Or have we not had enough
As in
lead on it?
amending the uses of it?
Yeah, it does say
Yes.
vote to create, amend,
Yes.
dissolve, or rename.
Yep.
So I think it falls within it definitionally, but as a practical matter, given that today is the 9th of March, we haven't really talked about this with anybody else before. Is it too close in time to get into that conversation for this year's annual?
You want to take this?
Town councils, at least legally, we can do it. So it's up to the board whether or not it's something that you wish to do. And I would say that, you know, if our chief financial officer is saying she accepts it and it's really kind of splitting hairs, we don't necessarily have to address it right now, but we certainly could, I suppose, if it comes up a month from now.
Mr. Pato?
So my preference would be to not address it this year, given that the work qualifies. And then I think it does make sense over the next year for us to consider how might we focus the use of this fund. And I'm hoping we will see something like a community development corporation emerge for building out more housing and the like. And I'm certainly open also to widening the scope of what we would do, but I'd like to have a considered discussion of that and involve the community. So no rushing.
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Mr. Pato. I would agree. I think it seems a little rushed to me, and it seems unnecessary. And it's the first year. I'm happy we're doing this. I would like to see how things go for the first year, even with your own use of the money. You know, you may not have access to all the units you actually want to do, and you may not be able to spend it all. Or maybe you'll spend 197.
We'll try.
Yeah. So I think it's worth us revisiting this later, because I don't think this is the last request we'll receive. My only hang up on this was the process that we went through and how this was sort of presented to us. So I think what we could all work on is, you know, how is this request handed over to our board to approve moving it forward to town meeting. And I think, if we can work a little closer on getting a formal request and then us approving the formal request and then bringing it to town meeting, I would prefer that process. But either way, the result is a good one, I think, if we're all in favor of this. Ms. Barry or Mr. Sandin, you're the only one that didn't chime in on waiting or doing it now, the change.
I think we can address this later.
Okay. All right. So we do not have a motion in front of us.
Questions or comments from the audience?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I have
Thank
one
you.
that was emailed in, if I'm allowed to read it.
I'm sorry, Ms.
Sorry.
Barry. It is it's after 9, as Ms. Hayes said, and I'm starting to
After 8.
forget. No, well, on that clock. Questions or comments from the audience? Okay, I don't see any. Ms. Barry, did you have a question you
I'll go,
want to bring?
because Mr. Pressman could not be here this evening, so he did send an email to me and Mr. Pato. I don't know if Mr. Pato's seen it. So this is Mr. Pressman's words. As it is inadvisable for me to attend tonight's meeting, I want to set forth a point I request the Select Board to address. This is Mr. Pressman. I have attended multiple summit meetings where adding money to the Capital Stabilization Fund and using money from the fund were discussed in public as a predicate for informed budget decisions. 2 elected boards and members of 2 important committees participated in these discussions. I'm also aware of the then board holding multiple public meetings to receive presentations on departmental budget proposals. Please provide a clear explanation of the public process or in detail the other process deemed lawful by which the proposed recipient of the first Brookhaven payment was identified. If that step has occurred, if it has not occurred, how and when will that determination be made before town meeting? I do understand the different question in tonight's summary. The amount of the total Brookhaven payment was based on then current estimates for providing units, accounting for the fact that the Brookhaven project would not include affordable units. Bob Pressman.
Ms. Barry, just because I'm hearing it and not reading it, did you want to respond to that? Or Mr. Pato, if you've had a chance to read it, I was having trouble
So I
following
think part
what
of
the
it is
question
Mr.
was.
Pressman is raising the same concern that you raised about the process through which this came to this board and was vetted in public, and how would one go about doing that, that's what I'm reading here, Mr. Pato.
And I just opened my email and found it.
Okay.
It came in at 7 o'clock, 6:40.
So it was sent to the select board at 6:15 and then sent to us at 7 o'clock.
Okay, so I think we've sort of answered the question, or I've answered the question. I guess my preference would be that we get a written request for this money in the future that we would then approve.
Right.
With some, details about the project that's being proposed.
So I think in this particular case, this is a new fund, and it's not kind of staying internal, which makes it different. It's going to LexHAB, which is a little bit kind of external, which makes it difficult. So I think there was a learning curve here.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Any further questions from the board? Okay, so we will bring this back on a future agenda to have an actual vote on it, because this is the first time we're actually hearing about it and discussing what the project is and hearing from Ms. Kosnoff on the capital concept. So I anticipate this will come back on our 16th agenda, and we can be prepared for town meeting with it. Okay? So we will now move on to our 9th item on the agenda, and our final, because we did the 10th item and we did the consent agenda already. Thank you. And this is to discuss the 2020 annual town meeting. Our first thing we're going to do is review the motion for Article 28, which is to amend the general noise bylaw, which is through a citizen's petition. And we have with us the proponents of that motion that's been drafted. Welcome back.
Hi. So,
Ms.
yeah.
Hamo, if you could just reintroduce yourself and who's with you, and
Sandra Mayo.
if you could speak into the microphone as well.
Sure. My name is Sandra Mayo.
Okay,
and
thank you.
I'm Barda Hamo.
Okay, thank you.
So we met with you in January.
Correct.
And you had a number of suggestions, and we have been going around talking to people and getting input on our proposal. And we've made a lot of changes, mostly additions, but some changes. So we wanted to present it to you and see what you think.
Great.
So I thought you might be interested in who we've been talking to.
Yes.
We've been holding our very own hearings. So we did talk to a number of contractors. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could speak into the mic so folks at home can hear you.
Okay. We've talked to a number of contractors who do work in Lexington. We called a lot of people. We got back a few calls, but we had some good conversations, and we were able to, I don't think anybody was tremendously thrilled with this, but on the other hand, we did get a number of interesting insights and suggestions that we were able to incorporate. We also talked to a number of town employees who were very helpful, including James Kelly, head of the building department, Cary Sisportis, head of public health, Captain McLean of the police department. And we got quite a bit of input from Christina Marshall, who I believe is in the town council's office. Okay, yeah. And Tony Galitzis, who's there, has been helping us. And we've also consulted with Bob Creech on the planning board, and went to town meeting social hours and so forth and so on. So all of the people we've spoken to have contributed their ideas and so forth, which we've tried to use in our draft motion. So some of the changes have just been more or less, just making it more correct in terms of the language that should be used for a motion, and some of it are more substantive. So at the time we first submitted, we had a placeholder of 5 days for how long it would take to kick off requiring a noise mitigation plan. So we've moved that to 15 days based on our discussions. The perspective we took in coming up with that number was, first of all, we weren't trying to capture every single construction project in town. We were trying to capture the large, loud and long ones, but also 15 days as people who are on the receiving end of this is around as much as anybody can stand. So that's where that number comes from. We tightened up the requirements for what the sound barriers have to do. So they should be designed to reduce sound levels by 10 dBA. That's a new requirement. And at the outset, we had the sound barriers going around the property, which we were told by multiple people didn't really make sense, and that the idea was that it should be as close as practicable to the source of the noise. We got some feedback from town meeting members that they were imagining highway barriers. We did not. Highway sound barriers, that's not what we intended. We want portable sound barriers. And given the way that construction projects go, we imagine not only are they portable from the point of view of being able to throw them up and not require a second construction project to build the sound barriers, but also that they would be moved around the construction site depending on what is going on. We did do some work on making sure these actually exist. They do. They are available for sale and rental. We found one company that can be obtained for rental from United Rental, which is one of the major construction company rental sources. We also added the objective in paragraph 2, which is the objective of this amendment is to keep maximum noise levels under 85 dBA at the property line. We had a fairly extensive conversation with Christina, what was her name? Christina Marshall about whether that requires it to be under 85, and it does not. It basically is saying that's the intention, and that's what it's descriptive language that allows people to understand what the intent. So a question that came up is what happens if it doesn't work? If basically the contractor doesn't do what they've committed to do in advance in the noise plan, or they don't maintain what they're doing in the noise plan. So they might start out with good sound barriers and then a storm comes along and blows them away, or whatever happens, and just a hypothetical example. And what we're proposing here is that in the event that the barriers haven't been put up properly, haven't been maintained, haven't been moved, or whatever, then the work has to cease until the problem's corrected. A question that came up in several of our conversations was, this actually was first pointed out to us by a contractor whom I think was trying to tell us that the whole thing didn't make sense. But the question is, you don't always find ledge when you test for it. So you may be doing your work on the property, and as far as you know, there's no ledge, and you're not going to need heavy equipment, and you're not going to have to do a lot of ledge removal, and then there's a change order or whatever, and you find that you do have it, and that you have to do ledge removal, and that's going to be noisy, but you've already got your building permit. So we added this paragraph 4, which is that if you do discover ledge after the fact, that you have to go back and get a noise mitigation plan, put a noise mitigation plan in place under the assumption that you meet the requirements of paragraph 1. Let's see. I see. Okay. Yes. Okay. And then finally, we added a paragraph on who should be enforcing this, which is the default in terms is the public health department, but we're adding in the building department, who are the ones who are going to be putting the noise enforcement, putting the noise mitigation plan in place. So, any questions?
Well, thank you, Ms. Hamo. I appreciate the going through the changes, and this has changed quite a bit from our last review of it.
Mm-hmm.
We will, I'll start actually, because I think Mr. Patta started last. So a couple questions and comments for you. And again, I appreciate all the work and outreach that you did. We often have well, not often, but once in a while we'll have proponents that come in, we give them advice, and then they don't really take it. So we do really appreciate you taking the advice and taking the initiative to talk to the building community. For presentation purposes at town meeting, I would bring a slide of what these barriers look like so that folks can have some visualization. Okay, that'll be really helpful. And then where you mentioned 15 days,
yep.
I think there's the word total. I don't know. Actually, I don't know what the intent is. Were you intending that it takes more than 15 days in total for the whole project? So if the project's a year long and it's 15 individual days, or were you talking about 15 days combined? So I'm just trying to figure out what the intent was, because you don't want someone to, I did 14 days and I waited a day and did 14 more days.
No. It's total over the course of the project, which I think we say here. Let's see. Over the course of the project. Yeah. The first paragraph,
yes,
the
yeah.
second
No, I
point.
see. When I read it Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, I'm just trying to look for ways that people could work around your, or find loopholes in it. So
Sure, yeah.
that's,
Is there a loophole there?
no, I think my colleagues are correct. I guess we don't need the word total. What's that?
I said, I don't think it would hurt, but I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, you
yeah.
could put the word total after 15 days. I think it's implied, but if you want, if you think that there's a possibility of a loophole, then maybe somebody else
Yeah.
does.
And I guess the forecast part is what also threw me off is, I didn't forecast that this would, who's determining the forecast of it's
Oh.
going to take 15 days? I guess that's the other question. How do you enforce that forecast? Because I said, I only planned on 14 days for this project, and sorry, it took 16. Just food for thought. I don't think it's
No,
a
I
deal
understand.
breaker.
Yeah.
I just think who's determining that is
I mean-
important.
I mean, the building department has to issue the building permit, and the theory is that they're not going to give a building permit unless there's an adequate noise mitigation plan in place. So, it could be 16, and then, oh well. But if it's 30 or 40, then, yeah.
So the only other sort of loophole thing I'm finding is that, this is for a residentially zoned area. We do have a lot of residentially zoned areas that abut commercial areas, and equally as obnoxious to the residents if they're living in that area. I'm not.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure if you're trying to say it impacts a residentially zoned area, or
That's a good question.
because if
So
you're on the
instead
line,
of in, it should say impacting.
yeah. Yeah. And again, I think from your own experience,
Yeah.
you may not have actually been next door to it. I'm not sure if you are or not next door to the project at hand, but, I think it probably disturbed the neighbors that were down
Yes.
the street, perhaps, 4 or
Certainly.
5 houses. So,
Yes, it did.
so I think we just thinking about the adjacency and what does that mean? So that's where I think an impact
Right.
versus a
Adjacent.
adjacent is
Yeah.
even more to the point of what you're trying to achieve,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Okay, good.
So, that's all I have for comments at this point, Ms. Barry.
Thank you. So I will say the point Mr. Lucente raises about residentially zoned is important. I live on Ledge in North Lexington, and when there was a project going on in Burlington, which is we're on the same ledge, when they were doing work for the new Millipore building, 6 days a week. Anyway, I'm a little bit confused here, so Mr. Malloy, I'm gonna call on you. So they're looking to, has town council seen this?
Yes.
Really? Okay. So I'm a little bit confused because in here, there's a part that says, under 2V, in addition to the general enforcement provisions, the building department in conjunction with public health has the power to enforce this section. So would you put 2 enforcement clauses within one section? Because 80-7 is the enforcement for this one, and then you probably don't have the code up on your computer. But I was a little bit confused by the numbering here. And maybe that's a question for later. So I was a little bit confused by the numbering, and then I didn't know.
We didn't write this, actually. This was put in after we sent it.
Okay.
We wrote something different, which was close to that. So I can't really answer that.
I didn't know if those two would be in conflict, is kind of my question.
The 2 enforcement agencies?
Well, no, so this is section, they want to
Oh.
make this section 80-8.
Yeah.
So section 80-7 is entitled Enforcement and Penalties, and it talks about who has the enforcement for all of 80, is the way I read it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why you would put enforcement then in 80-8.
What the person from the town council's office told us is that the health department had the power to enforce all of the noise regulations. However, we wanted to have the building department be involved because they were the ones who were
So in 80-7, it says police, fire, health, or inspectional services departments. Doesn't building fall under inspectional
Yes.
services?
Yes.
Or any designee thereof shall have the power to enforce this bylaw. So I didn't understand why 80-7 says one thing, and in this new 80-8, we have another.
I would say that the 80-8 is unnecessary
Okay.
because it's covered in 80-7.
Yeah.
So
that's-
this 5 is unnecessary?
Yes.
Because then my question to you was going to be, what's the fine? So that's why I went to the bylaw to see what the fine was in this chapter, and that's in 80-7B, which it's an amount not to exceed $50 per first violation.
We were,
No, we wanted to avoid that. All we want is not to hear the noise. So, because if people pay then the $50 or the $300 a day, that's not much.
Okay. I think it would have a little bit more teeth if there was a financial penalty in there. That's just my opinion.
the financial penalty here is stopping work, which is a lot bigger than $50 a day.
Yep.
So I'm going to say at the same time, the town could get some money for the stopping of work, for having to send people out to the property. And that's all I got.
But is that implied by the rest of the bylaw?
We're going to move on to Mr. Sandin. Questions or comments?
So I thank you for working on this. I continue to get comments from our residents about this issue of annoying their lives with not just noise. One of the things I've been hearing mentioned is that, and I think Ms. Berry just alluded to this, is that you can actually have vibration coming through. So I'm not exactly sure how we would address that with this bylaw right now. It appears to be focused on noise, but you could end up with days and days of vibration, Okay.
Could you put the microphone on? Could you just repeat your comment?
No, I was saying next
The microphone's not on, sorry.
Next year, maybe we'll be able to address that.
Okay. The other, I have similar comments to the other board members on enforcement. So as I read it, I'm saying designed to reduce sound levels outside the barriers by at least 10 dBA, and I start to wonder where. Is it, on the other side of the barrier? Is it at the property line? Where is it that you're trying to reduce the noise? And so I don't see that here, but I think we should be sort of making it clear what the intent is.
Well, if you look farther down, it says 85 dBA at the property line. But the barriers are, the barriers that we were looking at are rated. They have sound decrease ratings, and we're looking for a barrier that would have a 10 dBA reduction as part of its rating.
So I'm kind of wondering what the test is going to be in terms of enforcement. Are we going to be sending people out with noise meters? The way I read it, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like we're going to be just enforcing on the number of days. So I'm not exactly sure, but does the town manager have a comment on enforcement?
Well, I would think that given the wording here, that the objective of this amendment is to keep maximum noise levels at under 85 dBA at the property line, that if we send someone from the health department out or the building department, and they're standing there and they say, well, I think it's over 85, and the builder says, nah, it's about 60. And so we're going to need some kind of a measuring device, probably a little bit more sophisticated than using a cell phone, because you can do that, but probably something a little bit more sophisticated if we're going to take it in, and something that will measure it and also record it, because this would be through non-criminal disposition, and so we would have to eventually send staff into court, and so they would need to be able to present evidence.
Another comment I have, again, it's sort of on enforcement. Right now, we're sort of assuming that a neighbor or somebody else is going to report the builder if they're over their 15 days. I'm wondering if there's some kind of requirement that the builder's required to notify people if they, when they get a building permit, if the building permit says, I'm going to be doing ledge, and they make an estimate of 4 or 6 or 7 or 14 days, to Mr. Lucente's comment, that they would have a requirement to notify the town if they're going over that estimate. Otherwise, we're depending on the town or residents to enforce the provision here.
Are you suggesting that we add that?
I'm just suggesting that if we're going to have something that's workable, we probably want to have something that doesn't require neighbors to call in. If we, so it could say in the event that the builder exceeds, 15 days, they're required to. I'm not going to try to wordsmith it here, but
Right. Okay.
But I do think there's sort of like a different way of doing this. One way is having people complain, and another way is having the builder certify that they comply.
Thank you, Mr. Sandin. Ms. Hay?
So thank you. I think you guys have done a lot of work, and I appreciate that you've followed up on so much of what we said to you last time. So I'm sorry, we're coming up with another round. But as to the comments Mr. Lucente made at the beginning, I think that my sense is first, and actually I don't remember anymore whether this was Mr. Lucente or Ms. Berry, but I think it was Mr. Lucente. I would actually amend it to say that it's in or adjacent to residential. And a residentially zoned area. And then the other point about the activities and 15 days, I would actually take out the forecast. I would simply say that such activities take place on more than 15 days, because then it is, the onus is on the builder. When they apply for their permit, they have to determine if they think there's a likelihood that they're going to hit the 15 days, then they set up the plan. So that's how I would probably recommend addressing that. And then I also agree with Ms. Berry about fines. Somehow or other, the $50 doesn't, A, seem like harm, and B, it probably costs us more than that to send our staff out and to have to figure out what equipment it is that we're going to need to be using or to purchase to use for the measuring. So I think that may merit an additional fine. And then finally, my only other question was, when you met with both Mr. Kelly and with the inspectional services, the health department, what were their feelings regarding their abilities to enforce this?
They were on board.
They feel that they have the bandwidth to take this
Yeah.
on? Okay, that was important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hay. Mr. Pato?
So I am in favor of this, this article. And the only question I have is, it says in paragraph 2, sub-item 2, the objective of this amendment is to keep the maximum noise. Once this is a bylaw, this isn't an amendment, right? So it should be the subject of this section, or so that language should just be corrected.
Yeah, got it.
Otherwise,
Yeah, I understand. Yep.
no, I meant otherwise the comments my colleagues have made, I think will help,
Yeah.
but I am in favor.
Okay, questions or comments from the audience on this item? Ms. McKenna?
Dawn McKenna, Precinct 6 Town Meeting Member. Just on that line that we were talking about, the objective of this, to me, that kind of gets lost the way it is. I almost might put it at the beginning, whatever wording you're going to use, to the layout right in front, what you're trying to accomplish. So that was just my suggestion.
Thank you, Ms. McKenna. Seeing no further questions, my last just point I'll make is I think this is, the changes here are very digestible, because this change to me, by changing the number of days, you change it from the, this could happen a lot, you know, this use to these extreme projects that we've seen, that those are the ones we get the complaints about, like the ones on Grant Street and the one next in your neighborhood, you know, they seem like they're never ending. And it's a real nuisance to the neighborhood. And that's sort of this extreme building projects that we're doing. I think as Lexington grew as a community and was adding more housing stock, it was, you know, you worked around the situation that you were faced with. In you had a high water table, you built a house this way. You had, you know, a ledge, maybe you didn't build a full basement. Now everybody's trying to build these mansions, squeeze every ounce of that they can out of a property, and they're digging into ledge, and they're just doing more extreme building that, you know, maybe doesn't necessarily benefit the neighborhood as a whole. So I really appreciate the efforts to change this. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you both for coming in tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at town meeting.
Be there.
Okay, so next up we have the board's review of our draft report. Oh. Why is there no ocean? Why is the ocean hitting us? Oh, boy. Okay, it's getting late. There are, actually, before we get to our draft report, there are a couple of the motions that were attached. Ms. Axtell, did you put those attachments in the packet with the additional articles? We have Article 33, running bamboo, Article 40, wireless, and Article 41, technical corrections?
Yes, I did. Those were requested by the board last week.
Okay, and so I guess just for an opportunity for the board, is there anything specific you want to mention on any of those three items while we're all together? And give an opportunity for any discussion or debate about that.
Well, I have a comment on Article 33, the running bamboo. At our last meeting, Mr. Sandin asked, how can we know what these are? Since the comment is made bamboo, nobody can tell just looking at it. It's the rhizomes, the root structure for running bamboo for mono, now I've forgotten the term, but the type of root is what defines that it's going to grow in a particular way. So when it has invaded somebody else's property, which is the condition of the article, you can dig out the piece and take a look at the roots and determine, is this fall under the bylaw or not?
Mr. Sandin.
So my question was, as I was hoping to hear from the town manager, whether the town staff felt comfortable enforcing this.
Mr. Malloy, do you have any? I don't have a response. Okay, all right, so maybe we'll have to wait on getting that answer. Ms. Barry.
So maybe it was my reading of this motion. Has this motion gone through town council? 33? Yep. So at first I thought it was talking just about running bamboo on town-owned property and town-owned rights-of-way. But if you read it clearly at other points, it talks about private property. So from the get-go, you know, there at capital letter A, it talks about town-owned property, so like it's a town thing, but then later on, it says personal property within there. So just make sure when you read it closely.
Mr. Pato.
Just to be clear, it says the intent of the bylaw is to preserve and protect private and town-owned property. It starts with private property.
Yes. But at first, I was more taken in by town-owned, and I said this is for the town. And then, yeah, it does talk about private.
Okay. Any further questions on Article 33? Well, we have the motion up. No. Okay, so let's move on to Article 40, wireless. Now, Mr. Creech was planning to be here this evening, but he's unable to make it. He wanted to just, you know, I think make some comments on that. He is going to email us as a board the comments that he had on this particular item. Now, we have not had a presentation on this. I know we had discussed maybe getting a presentation from the planning department, but we haven't yet. Ms. Barry?
I was just wondering, is CAC going to weigh in on this, or have they weighed in on it, Mr. Sandin?
CAC has supported this, not unanimously.
What was their vote?
I'm not sure I remember what the vote was, but it was 2-1, so it was something to 1.
And I will just point out one other piece of information. Mr. Creech mentioned that, and I'm giving probably too little information, but he said this could have an impact on the streetscape project. But that's what I was hoping he would be here to address. So we'll wait for his clarification on his email. So I don't think any of us at this point are ready to take positions on this particular article. I know I am not. So, okay, so we'll move on to Article 41, which is technical corrections. While the motion is up, does anyone have any questions, concerns, comments on this? Okay, seeing no one. That's good. This one seems more technical in nature anyway. Okay, so now we'll move on to our draft board report.
Just one question.
Oh, yes, Mr. Sandin.
Did the planning board take a position? I think they did on this.
On the
this
technical
thing.
corrections?
I think they did.
I am actually not sure off the top of my head. Miss Axtell?
Give me one moment, I can
Okay.
verify.
All right. So we'll move on to our draft report. I think at this point, this is probably the third time we're reading this. I think we've had a lot of team effort on this one, getting it to the point that it's at. Miss Barry, did you have something you wanted to say about the report?
About the report?
Is there a typo?
I do. No, well, no. I'm not sure about that. But so I had a conversation with 2 different residents last week, and both of them inquired about the Center Streetscape project. And we don't talk about the Center Streetscape project in this report, do we? So I know it's late, but I'm thinking we need to put in perhaps just a paragraph that talks about, because town meeting was under the impression they approved the money last year at annual town meeting. We're going out for the grant, and that the project was going to start this year after Patriots' Day. It's not starting in calendar 2020 after Patriots' Day, it's now 21. So I think we need to put a paragraph in there for that, where it was such a large project. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
I think that's a good point, and I'm wondering if we can work it in under that last heading where it's municipal and school buildings and major projects, potentially. And we put that as the major project.
I would almost give it its own heading, because I think, I just feel we need to cover that in town meeting. I know we're on deadline, but it
Well, I
just
just
struck
don't,
me.
Again, I think it's the language thing, and, I don't think any of us are in a position at this point in the evening to sit here and draft that language.
No, I'm not saying draft it
So-
tonight. I'm saying that that language could come back in this next week, because unfortunately, that's how this process has to work.
At some point, the 16th is happening. What's that?
That would be our last chance.
Yeah, because after that, we're at town meeting. We have to print them. Yeah. So we're just putting a lot of pressure on the staff
Can I ask?
to get it done.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I ask what specifically would we want to include? Do we want to include, like with some of these, the history of how we got to here? Or are we just going with where we are today, following the funding on date X?
So I look at this report as where we were when we left annual town meeting last April, and where we are, what has happened since then to now. Because people haven't necessarily paid attention and realized that we didn't get the grant. So we need to say we applied for the Mass Works grant, we did not get it. The project is now anticipated, for whatever reason, to begin next year, or in calendar year 21. It should be completed by 23, 4.
I mean, I think given the brevity of it, I actually think it could fit under the last section.
That was my thinking.
So I'll give in on where it goes. I just think there needs to be a statement in here about that project. I mean, it was $10 million.
So what if we were to put it as the first, we change potentially this heading, and we put it as the first thing under the heading, so nobody misses it, and then they go down and read the school buildings.
Municipal, so you'd say municipal and school buildings and major projects.
Major capital projects. And maybe it just says major capital projects.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's
And then it
actually
has
probably better. Yeah.
the streetscape, and then school buildings, and then municipal buildings, or vice versa.
So the title will be Major Capital Projects, and then the first section will be Center Streetscape Project. And we'll use a similar construction estimate, funding, et cetera, and then a couple lines about what happened with the grant.
I mean, if you want to put all that in there, I just thought it needed like 2 or 3 sentences about where we are.
I'm saying 2 or 3 sentences. I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
to fit with the format of the other. Who did the municipal school buildings project? Oh, good. Then you can. Do you mind doing this section?
I'll do it, but I'm
Since
going to try one last time, for I think it should stand alone. It can go after this section, maybe?
I just don't think there's enough enough substance in it, and it's not very different from past big spending, big ticket items.
I'll do it, and then you guys can figure out where to put it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Barry. Any further edits to the edits? Mr. Pato.
So there's a small question. In the next to last paragraph, which is about Lexington High School, we had a discussion last time about removing there were other communities. And I took a stab at saying that there was a cap on funding, because that was a direct quote from the MSBA on their letter to the town. And I think it is helpful to explain the reason we didn't get it is they ran out of money. They didn't find any material objections to giving the town funding. They just didn't have enough. That's why it was compelling, and that they strongly encouraged us to apply again. So the language that's there right now says, but that did not invite us. We should have been just, but did not invite us. It's the first sentence of the next to last paragraph. And I would rather say, but that there was a cap on funding and the MSBA did not invite us.
Second.
Yeah, it's fine.
So after the word "but," we'll just add the words "did not invite." Oh, sorry. There is a cap on funding. So we'd say, "But there is a cap on funding."
Right. Ms. Katzenbach actually has the language, because I submitted it to her.
Oh, all right.
In my draft.
Okay.
So then I have a question on the next sentence.
It's in here, though, right? You're saying it's not in here?
It's not in here.
It's not the version that came back out to the board. So it currently says, starting at the left-hand edge, was compelling, but that did not invite us into the process this year. That's the end of the sentence. And I'd like to have it say, was compelling, but that there was a cap on funding and the MSBA did not invite us.
The grammar's off. If you read the sentence, it now would say that is a misplaced, because it can't say. The response was that while Lexington's
maybe we could work
case,
this out offline, because I think we're
We're in
gonna get
technical stuff,
into
we're not in
grammar.
substance.
Yeah, and I think Ms. Katzenbach will correct.
I just want to say on that last line in that paragraph, after where it says Lexington is facing, is that a comma or a period? I can't tell.
It's a comma.
So that should be a lowercase t?
Lowercase
Yeah.
t, yep.
Okay.
Had the same comment.
And then I just had one question going back to the SPRD on page 3. Again, the second sentence says, the board allocated funds in its FY19 budget. Did we actually use money from our budget, or we used the Shire funds?
In 19, we used our budget.
Okay. I just wasn't clear on that.
Okay. Any other final changes? So we just have the MSBA language for the high school project. And, Ms. Katzenbach's pointing out to KK1.
Oh, we have to revise the police station statement. I can send that to you when I send you the Center Streetscape.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
And there's another typo, a capital T instead of a lowercase t on page I'll send it to Ms. Katzenbach since it's a Scrivener's change.
Okay. And so I guess since this is coming back, we don't have to approve it this evening. I don't know how other communities, there's a community I saw recently that does a quarterly newsletter from its board. And it's 11 pages long. So I'm not sure how they get it done.
Sign it to one person.
No, every member contributes to it. So very interesting. Okay, so moving on to our final part of this discussion, which is to review our positions chart.
Excuse me, Mr. Lucente.
Yes,
I
I'm
had
sorry,
that
Ms.
information
Axtell.
for Article 41
Oh,
for the Planning Board.
great.
So I have set, if you have any other questions about their votes, but 41 received, 500 votes to recommend favorable action at town meeting for Article 41.
Great, thank you, that's helpful. So while we're on that topic,
I was going to say, do you
you
have,
want
I
the
would
other
love the
votes?
other, that
Yes.
would be helpful.
So Articles 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 41, and 42 all received 500 votes to recommend favorable action at town meeting. This includes 1050 Waltham Street, the Citizens Petition. Article 40, the wireless article, was a 401 vote. Articles 43, 44, and 45, citizen articles, were split. So
I just-
43, 44, and 45, the citizens petitions were split. That's,
2-2?
I don't have the exact, it just says split, yes.
And 46 is withdrawn or IP'd?
IP'd,
Right.
yes.
Mr. Sandine, I'm sorry, you're just asking for 46, correct? Yeah, IP, okay. Okay, so I know at the last meeting, some of the board members were asking about waiting, wanting to see the planning board report. I actually don't know what the status of that report is. I don't know if Ms. Axtell, do you have any info on that? No. Okay. So I would assume we have a little time. Hopefully we get it. You know, that's, I think, one of the challenges, us taking positions where we can, and then there's some that we just won't be able to take positions on if we don't have all the information to make a decision. So what I will do, what I would like to do is go through the anything that has some weights on it to see if anyone wants to make changes. We'll not go through anything that has all yeses. So there was one weight on the Pine Meadows Golf Club house renovation. Did I miss one before that?
Nope.
Oh, Mr. Sandine? Article 11A.
I just haven't had time to get to that yet.
Okay. Article. Did I skip article? I'm sorry, I skipped Article 8. I wasn't understanding what you're saying. So this was the impact, the short-term rental impact fee. Ms. Hay and I were both await.
So I'm still trying to get a sense of residents, particularly.
Yeah.
And I'm not, in theory, I'm in favor of this, but I'm really trying to understand the effect of the impact.
Yeah. And I think one thing I learned 3 years ago when I first did this was that it's okay to be wait all the way up to town meeting. You can decide when it's debated. So I'm going to stay a wait on that as well. So moving on to, someone catch me if I'm wrong, but 10K. How did I miss? I must be tired.
Just
Parker,
continuing to wait.
Meadow. Okay.
Just haven't
Continue
got
to
to
wait
that
on
yet.
Parker Meadow. Okay, 16A, police outdoor indoor firing range on Hartwell Avenue. So I was a wait, Miss Barry was a wait, and Mr. Sandine was also a wait. I personally, based on the information, I just got some information today from sent to me from the Economic Development Advisory Committee advocating some information about being not in favor of this project. So I need some time to review that information that they're providing.
The Economic Development Advisory Committee will actually be discussing this at their meeting Wednesday morning at 8.
Did they already discuss it at their last
No, they're
meeting?
discussing it this week.
Oh, then I'm not sure. I got people advocating against it directly to me from the EDAC.
They're talking about it again, but I do believe they've taken a position in the past.
And the position
But
was a negative
before I
one?
was on the select board.
Yeah, well, so I didn't. So
Anyway.
that would be an older position then. I mean, I know there are people who have different views, but they are taking it collectively as the current committee this Wednesday morning.
Okay, so I'm going to wait to hear what they have to say. I don't know if anyone else is ready. Ms. Barry or Mr. Sandine are ready to change positions. You'll wait, okay. And then we had more information on the Public Facilities Master Plan. Mr. Sandine, 16C. Nope.
Oh, I said I was going to have a conversation with town manager. We just haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay. And then
Is that like a wait then versus more information, which was stuff to come to the meeting?
was that more information to come to the meeting, Mr. Sandine, or was it just a conversation you need to have?
What I said at the last meeting, I just wanted to talk about the scope. I'm just not 100%
All right, so we'll make
clear
that
on the
wait,
scope.
okay. And I think 19, which we discussed this evening, so I'm not sure if everyone wants to change. I will be happy to change to a yes. Mr. Pato?
I will change to a yes.
And Ms. Barry? Yes. Okay, so we're all yeses on 19. Great. Okay, moving on to 23, which is to appropriate for authorized capital improvement. We were all waits. What's that, Ms. Hay?
Do we yet know whether this is going to have content, going to be IP'd? Do we know where we are on this?
Ms. Kosnoff, did you have any?
I was just going to say, we're fully expecting that one will be IP'd.
IP'd, okay.
At this point in the game, if a capital project came up, it would be challenging to get it funded anyway. So I would expect that's going to be IP'd.
Okay. Purchase of land eminent domain, which is Article 25. That we're still await as a board. Article 28, which is just came before us this evening with the citizens that were at the microphone. We were all await. I don't know if anyone wants to change the position at this point. Mr. Pato?
I'm willing to change to a yes.
Ms. Hay?
I am as well.
Ms. Barry? Mr. Sandine? Stay await. Okay, I'm going to stay await as well. Just because I want to make some phone calls. Now that we've seen the language, I'd like to hear some feedback myself. So declaring us, that's all. We had one wait on declaring a climate emergency, Ms. Hay.
That's me. I'm fully in favor of the concept. There's a little bit of language that
still.
remains a concern for me.
Still wait, okay. And then land exchange under Article 30, which was presented on the 10th of February, Mr. Malloy.
The board had asked for the appraisal report, and my understanding is we'll probably get it tomorrow.
Okay.
It's due tomorrow.
So we'll bring that back up. 33.
There was also some changes to the square footage, which you said maybe weren't material, but there was some changes in the. So I just want to be sure we're looking at the current, because we had some change in how many square feet we're in, and I think at the last board meeting you said there had been some minor changes.
There had been a pretty major change from the original proposal, but there are no further changes that I'm aware of. Okay. The original proposal was like 3,500 square feet in exchange for 16,000 square feet or something like that, and now it's much closer to in equal trade.
Mr. Pato? No, okay, all right. So, Ms. Hay, did you have something on that?
I sort of have Mr. Sandine's recall as well, that there was something about sort of truing up the differences, and I think it had to do somewhere over on the far right side of the map near where the easement line was. I do recall that conversation.
So we'll check the transcript. Okay, so moving on to Article 33, which is the running bamboo control. We were all await, looking for the motion.
And I'm willing to change to a yes.
Is anyone else willing to change to a yes at this point?
I am.
Ms. Hay, I'm willing to change to a yes. Ms. Barry? Wait, Mr. Sandin?
I was just going to wait for the town to say how they feel about enforcement.
Okay, so we have 3 yeses and 2 waits. The special legislation development of a surcharge for community housing, which is citizens petition, which Mr. Daggett was here, I believe, on March 2nd. Does anyone want to change a position from a wait?
I'm willing to change to a yes.
Ms. Hay?
I'm still a wait.
I'm still a wait, but leaning toward a no on that one. Ms. Barry? Mr. Sandin? Okay. Article 35, which was amend the zoning bylaw, distance from basement slab or crawl space and groundwater. That, there was 3 waits and 2 yeses. The waits were myself, Ms. Barry, and Ms. Hay. Are any of us looking to change our position on that item?
Am I correct, Ms. Axtell, that this is one of the ones that the planning board supported? I think I wrote that down.
Yes.
So I think I am comfortable with their guidance that I will, because this is fairly technical in my mind, and therefore I will change to a yes.
Mr. Sandin?
My recollection of a question for town manager is I was under the impression that the town staff also supported this. Is that?
This is one that was emanated from our town staff.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Barry, you're a wait? No, okay, you want to be, when you said yes, I wasn't sure if you were saying yes to me or yes to the article. Okay, so now I can change to a yes on this one as well. So we're all yes on Article 35. Article 36, which is to amend the zoning bylaw short-term rentals. We had 2 waits, myself and Miss Barry were both waits on this one. Miss Barry, you're a yes, I can be a yes on this one as well. Okay, moving on to Article, we're in the home stretch. Article 37, which is to amend the zoning bylaw for site plan review. Again, I'm not sure if anyone wants to wait for the planning board reports. You know, that's completely acceptable. Any, or we can stay away if folks aren't. Okay, we'll stay as waits on this one. The financial services article, which again I believe on 38 was a unanimous vote of the planning board. Is that correct, Ms. Axtell? Okay.
Ms. Hay, where was the center committee on that one?
They were in favor.
Center committee was in favor.
Center committee was in
Okay.
favor. And I'm
Anyone
willing
on
to change to a yes now.
Okay, so Mr. Sandin was the only yes on this one. The rest of us were waits. I have Ms. Hay changing to a yes.
And I'm a yes.
Pato's
I'm
a
a yes.
yes. Barry, Ms. Barry's a yes. I'm a yes. Okay, solar energy systems. We were all waits on that article. Any? Mr. Sandin, do you know if they're still
I
talking
don't know
about
what
it?
the status is, so I'm still a wait.
All right.
I tried to get some time to watch the planning board, but I haven't had time to
Okay, and
see what they did yet.
I would concur with that. I would like to see the discussion on that because it seemed to generate a lot of community feedback at this point.
So I'll be a yes. If it changes again, I'll revisit. But the last draft, I'm a yes.
Okay, so Mr. Pato's a yes. Anyone else want to be a yes or a no or continue to wait? Okay, so the four waits, 1 yes. We have, next item is wireless communication facilities, which we just heard was a split vote of the planning board, so I would assume we're all waits, and we may want to see what some details around that. I'm sorry, it was 401?
401.
Okay,
yes.
but Mr. Sandin, did you mention, there was a split vote at the Communication Advisory Committee?
Yes, I don't remember what the vote was, but most of the committee was in favor and 1 said no.
Okay, I'd like to get a little bit of information myself on what the no was.
Right, so I will change to a yes, and my understanding is also to comply with the current Federal Communications Act. We need to make these changes. So I'm a yes.
Anyone else want to change to yes from a wait?
Are we scheduling this at
We-
all for?
I think we need someone to explain. I need someone maybe to be here to answer questions. It's beyond my technical expertise.
There were enough questions in my mind that I'm still a wait.
Okay.
As to what we're allowing to be put on our center streetscape.
Okay. Zoning bylaw technical corrections, we had 3 waits and 2 yeses. I can be a yes on this one. Article 41.
I can be yes as well.
Ms. Hay and Ms. Barry? Yes, okay. Moving on to Article 42, which is the 1050 Waltham Street, which we just signed the MOU on. We had Mr. Pato and Mr. Sandine as a wait.
So I'm a yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we're all yeses on Article 42. Article 43, which is the zoning bylaw and map for Hartwell Avenue. I'm having a conversation with Mr. Hornig this week, and I'd like to wait for that. I don't know if anyone wants to change their view on Article 43. No. Okay. And Ms. Axtell, could you clarify the zoning? Sorry. The planning board was a no?
For 43,
there was-
44, and 45, it was split.
It was split, but we don't know.
It was a 2-3 vote. They did vote against it.
They voted against it 2-3, okay. I thought that, but, Article 44, I'm sorry, did anyone want to change on Article 43? Is everybody a wait?
Wait.
Okay. Article 44 is the amend the zoning bylaw map, Bedford Street near Hartwell Avenue. Another article from Mr. Hornig, we were all waits, still all waits, okay. Article 45, amend zoning bylaw front yard transition and screening areas. Mr. Pato was a yes. The rest of us were wait. I could actually, I think I can be a yes on this one. So change me to a yes, Mr. Pato. Oh, I'm sorry, you were a yes, Ms. Barry, Ms. Hay, or Mr. Sandine? Waiting, okay.
Also meeting with Mr. Hornig this week.
Okay. So that is 2 yeses and 3 waits, and then the Article 46 is IP'd, which I think in this case we would all be a yes. to
Yes.
IP it. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you for indulging us in that, and I think that brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. So the next my computer has frozen, so our next select board meeting is on Monday, March 16th, 2020 at 7 p.m. in the select board meeting room. We may amend that to 6 p.m. Because of the number of articles we have to look at and the number of items that are coming back from this specific meeting. So with that, I will take I move that we adjourn. Is there a second? Second. Okay, second, moved and second. All in favor? Signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.